stood at the edge of the water, the current swirling like angry snakes. Our protagonist, Hua Mujin, declared that this was their next training program they were going to cross, no matter how dangerous it looked. One of the men looked absolutely terrified, telling Mujin that it was impossible. He said the current was too fast, and people were known to die trying to cross, even without carrying anything. With a weight attached to his back, Hua Mujin ignored the fear and said he was going ahead. Another person decided to follow Hua Mujin, yelling that they were going too, but then they screamed as they jumped into the raging water. Someone else shouted that they were screwed, but they had to run. It was a do-or-die situation, and they were all in it together. Even a little boy didn't back down and jumped into the water. While swimming, Mujin says that if anyone fell, they would die, so they should move their arms and legs non-stop. The little boy face was contorted with effort as he kicked and paddled, trying to stay afloat. The water crashed around him, threatening to pull him under. The struggler pushed forward, his arms aching and his lungs burning. He could do it, he told himself. Even something like this. But the current was too strong for the boy, and he couldn't keep the pace. The training was certainly crazy, but to understand how they got here, we need to go back a few decades. Battlefield was a total mess, covered in the bodies of fallen warriors. This was the work of one man, the divine demon, Zhang Qian. He stood over the carnage he created, the last one standing. Even surrounded, he just kept fighting, cutting through anyone who got in his way. He was a force of nature, and no one could stop him. But the leaders of the great sects were watching. They saw that even the divine demon was getting tired. They believed this was their one and only chance to take him down for good. He heard them, exhausted or not, his eyes burned with rage. He wasn't finished yet. The three masters didn't hesitate. They prepared themselves and charged forward together, ready to end it all. They met head-on, the air crackling with tension. It was a battle of wills, as much as a battle of strength. The abbot's attack landed with incredible force. Zhang Qian grunted in pain as he was thrown back, the ground exploding where he stood. But the abbot wasn't done. He cursed the divine demon as he gathered energy for another, even more powerful strike. He unleashed his final move, the heavenly Buddha palm strike. A massive wave of green energy shot straight for Zhang Qian. But instead of being blown away, Zhang Qian met the blast head on. He used his sword to redirect the entire stream of energy. He didn't just stop it, he moved right through it. The abbot stared in disbelief, unable to understand what was happening. Before the abbot could react, Zhang Qian was on him. He declared he would take him down first and brought his sword down with all his might. But as he held the abbot down, he screamed at the other two masters. He demanded to know what they were waiting for, telling them that now was the time to strike. Spurred into action, the other two masters finally moved. They unleashed their own powerful techniques at the same time. One used the Plum Blossom Flash Strike, and the other, the Thunder Rolling Strike. Two of the strongest techniques in the world were aimed at one man. With his focus entirely on the abbot, Zhang Qian couldn't defend himself. The two attacks slammed into him from both sides. The force of the two strikes slammed into Zhang Qian. He roared, blood flying from his mouth, his eyes glowing with pure rage. Seeing his chance, the abbot moved in. He gathered all his remaining energy for one final, decisive strike. He unleashed the blast, offering a final prayer for his enemy's soul, completely sure that this was the end. But it wasn't over. As another master launched his own attack, a massive blade glowing with red energy appeared right above him. The man's face went pale with shock. He couldn't believe it was possible. Zhang Qian moved like a flash of demonic light, turning their perfect ambush into his own attack. He wasn't just defending anymore. He was hunting. Meanwhile, on another part of the battlefield, two of the great masters were already down. The last one stood alone, facing a completely different enemy, and that fight was already over. The new warrior, a man with long, dark hair, and a twisted grin, held the final master up like a trophy. He had taken them all down. The great masters looked on, their faces twisted in pure horror. They weren't fighting a man, they were fighting a monster. As Zhang Qian dove down like a demon, the masters below scrambled. One of them screamed for everyone to fall back, but it was too late. The master tried to block, but Zhang Qian's strike went right through his guard. This was the divine demon, Zhang Qian. He was the man who single-handedly drenched the land in blood. To stop him, all the martial masters of the 9 great sects had gathered in one place. But even with all their power combined, it wasn't enough. They were facing a man whose strength was called the greatest under heaven. Their grand alliance was already on the brink of collapse. As their swords clashed, one of the warriors laughed and mocked his opponent, asking the old man if he'd already prepared his gravesite. The old master just smiled. He said a grave was ready, all right, for Zhang Qian. Then he unleashed a storm of pink energy from his sword. The technique was called Plum Blossom Rain. It was beautiful, but every petal was deadly. Zhang Qian moved through the storm like a ghost. Dark, shadowy figures started to rise from the ground, trying to trap him inside inside the blizzard of blossoms. He was bleeding, his grip on his sword slick with blood. But he wasn't done yet. For just a moment, a memory flashed through his mind. A peaceful day under a tree with his wife and children. A life he could never have again. That thought turned his grief into pure fury. His eyes began to glow red in the darkness. He channeled all of that rage into his blade. This was his technique, the Black Dragon execution. The dark energy hit the old master dead on. He let out a final agonizing scream, but the fight wasn't over. Another warrior appeared out of nowhere, unleashing a blindingly fast sword attack. The technique was called the Infinite Emperor Sword Art. It created a cage of pure energy, trapping Zhang Qian inside. The attack tore through him, and he cursed the warrior from the Namgung clan. It hurt, but he refused to fall. In that moment of pain, he saw his children again. This was for them. He looked up at the Namgung warrior and just smirked, telling him the attack only tickled. His opponent was speechless. The red glow in his eyes intensified. He was done defending. He released a wave of dark, demonic energy straight at his enemy. The attack hit him head on, and the warrior screamed as the energy tore him apart. The Namgung warrior coughed up blood as the demonic energy slammed into him, knocking him off his feet. But before Zhang Qian could even catch his breath, another warrior appeared. He screamed Zhang Qian's name, calling him a filthy demon. Without wasting a second, the man charged, his sword crackling with bright blue lightning. It was some kind of lightning technique, and it was massive. The energy rushed towards Zhang Qian from all sides, leaving him no room to escape. The warrior's eyes were filled with rage. He was putting everything he had into this one strike. The lightning sword plunged straight through Zhang Qian's chest. The warrior screamed at him to just die already. He was sure of it. He grinned, declaring that Zhang Qian's stubborn life was finally over. But he was wrong. Zhang Qian looked up, his eyes burning with red light. He wasn't even close to being done. As he stood there, impaled, a memory came back to him. It was a happy moment with a woman and 2 children, releasing lanterns into the night. The memory faded, and he was back in the fight. He grabbed the blade sticking through his chest, much to the warrior's shock. It was time to finish this. With a surge of power, he started pulling the sword right through his own body. He didn't care about the pain. He just used the blade to pull his enemy closer, getting right in his face. The warrior couldn't believe it. The man he'd stabbed through the heart was now in complete control. Before the warrior could even react, Zhang Qian struck. A single, powerful chop to the neck. The warrior collapsed. Zhang Qian let go of the sword, finally free. He stood alone in the swirling darkness. Another enemy was gone. He finally collapsed, his body giving out. He hit the ground with a thud, and everything started to go dark. The dark energy of the fight slowly faded into the sky. But even as his life slipped away, his eyes were still full of defiance. He had fought against hundreds, maybe thousands, and he was the only one left standing. His brutal hand finally loosened its grip on his sword. The long, brutal fight of the divine demon was finally over. But that wasn't the end. His story was starting over, in a much different place. In a small courtyard, a man was yelling at a young boy, furious that he would dare to act up. He felt like he was reaching for something, but there was nothing there. That's when his life started flashing before his eyes. It began with a memory from when he was just a kid, already getting into fights. Even then, people could see he was a good fighter. He remembered his master's face from back then. This was the moment his life in the world of martial arts truly started. It all started with brawls just to survive. He wandered without a home, with only a single sword to rely on. His entire life became a blur of one fight after another. It was just endless, meaningless fighting. He started to wonder if a life like that could ever have any real purpose. He was always the last one standing, completely alone. But then, a woman's voice seemed to answer his thoughts. She told him she understood that feeling perfectly. She told him her life was a battle too. She had to argue with people at the market every day, treating everyone like an enemy just to survive. Then she'd go home and deal with her younger siblings, complaining about food. But she said that in the quiet moments, they were the most precious thing in the world. After her parents were gone and she felt like giving up, they gave her a reason to live again. She looked at him with a kind smile and asked him to find a meaning for his own life, too. Her words echoed in his mind as he remembered what happened to her. All he ever wanted was to live with them. For a man who only knew how to take lives, she had given him a reason to want one. So he raised his sword again, this time for vengeance. But his life went back to being aimless. Just one fight after another. He was completely lost again. But he could never forget her smile. He just stood there, thinking about the life he could have had. And the memory of it all was enough to make him cry. He finally understood. The meaning he'd been looking for his whole life. It was right there in front of him all along. His sword had grown dull from countless battles, and his body was covered in wounds. And in that moment, he finally lowered his sword. Suddenly, a furious voice cut through his thoughts, demanding to know who would dare sell the clan's martial arts for a few coins. His eyes snapped open. He saw a group of people standing before him, their expressions cold and demanding. His younger siblings watched, completely confused. They wondered what was happening, asking if this was some kind of hell. But his little brother shouted back at the intruders, telling them it wasn't. He declared that his older brother was still alive, so there was no way they would ever give the clan's martial arts to outsiders. His little sister joined in, shouting that the intruders weren't even direct blood relatives. She declared that their grandfather's martial arts would remain with the Flame Hua clan, period. Hua Mujin's eye flashed red. He was taking it all in. He looked at the people threatening his family, wondering who the hell they were. The man leading the group realized this wasn't going to be easy. He sighed and said he had a proposal. But before he could say more, a hand shot out and grabbed his arm. It was Hua Mujin. The man wasn't surprised. He looked down and laid out his terms. A duel. Hua Mujin would have to wager his clan's entire martial arts legacy. He then asked Hua Mujin what his answer was, completely confident he had him trapped. His siblings panicked. The little brother shouted that Hua Mujin couldn't even begin his training because of his madness. He accused the man of setting an obvious trap. Hua Mujin had heard enough. All the panicked shouting was just annoying noise to him. He looked down at his siblings and asked a question that made no sense. He wanted to know who the hell Hua Mujin was. With a terrifying look in his eyes, he made a declaration. He wasn't Hua Mujin. He was the divine demon. The man just stared back at him, completely unimpressed by the whole divine demon thing. This was Chang Dobo, the second son of a powerful merchant group. He laughed, saying the claim wasn't even funny, and that Hua Mujin might as well call himself the king of the underworld. His younger siblings couldn't even look up. They were completely embarrassed by his outburst. Chang Dobo looked down on them all, convinced that Hua Mujin's madness was just getting worse by the day. That's when a woman named Bu Choyeon, the master of the merchant group, stepped in. She said that with the eldest son in such a state, the fate of the Flame Hua clan was already sealed. She claimed she was only saying this out of kindness because of their family ties. Without saying a word, Hua Mujin pressed down on Chang Dobo's hand. He was accepting the duel. With that, the deal was made. The duel would be held at the Byong Pavilion on the 5th day of the 2nd month. As they left, Chang Dobo looked back with a smirk. He warned Hua Mujin not to even think about breaking their promise. With the intruders gone, Hua Mujin stood there with his younger siblings. He thought about the name he had just declared, Divine Demon Zhang Qian. The heavy gate slammed shut, leaving them completely alone. His siblings turned to him, their faces filled with worry. His sister asked what he was going to do, reminding him that he'd never even swung a sword properly before. Hua Mujin just turned and looked down at them. He wasn't worried. He figured that even at a beginner's level, all he needed was one burst of inner energy to win. So he tried to gather that energy, and suddenly froze. His siblings watched him, completely confused by the awkward silence. His mind was screaming. He couldn't find a single drop of inner energy. This new body had nothing at all. It wasn't just the lack of energy. This new body was completely frail. He couldn't believe how weak it was, wondering if it could even hold a sword. His little sister saw him and started shouting, begging him to stop. To her, this just looked like another one of his crazy episodes. She pleaded with him to come back to his senses. She told him that even if he was lost in madness, he was still her brother. Her worry turned to anger. She couldn't understand what kind of fool would just quietly accept a challenge like that. She kept shouting that she wouldn't allow it, while her brother just stood there looking completely worried. And then, the little brother's voice cut through everything. He screamed that it was all Hua Mujin's fault. Their mother and father were gone. Zhang Cheon just stood there, listening. He was finally learning the real story behind this family's mean. The weight of his own words was too much for the little boy, and he turned and ran away crying. His sister just sighed, completely drained. The little sister just sighed, completely drained. Her brother stood silently, watching Hua Mujin with a cold, unforgiving look. Without another word, Zhang Qian turned and walked away, leaving them behind. He couldn't believe it. Even the children were treating him like a crazy person. The whole situation was just absurd to him. As the sun began to set, he found himself standing in front of a tall stone monument, lost in thought. His mind drifted back to his final moments as the divine demon. He remembered cutting down the head of the Namgung clan. He could still feel the phantom pain of a blade piercing his own heart, stealing his breath. He remembered the reason for that final battle. He had done it all to get revenge for a woman named Manhwa and her siblings. Back then, his purpose had been so clear. He remembered the endless fighting. The battles always ended the same way, with him kneeling in the dirt, surrounded by destruction. And he remembered the children he was trying to protect. They were the entire reason for his war. But now, he thought about his new siblings. The little girl had called him mad. He just couldn't understand any of it. His thoughts were cut short by someone running towards him. The man was frantic. He scolded Hua Mujin for leaving the house with such a weak body, telling him how worried he'd been. Hua Mujin just stared back, completely unfazed by the man's panic. The man bowed respectfully. His name was Ma Sok, a loyal servant of the Flame Hua clan. Ma Sok began to explain who the real Hua Mujin used to be. He described a young man who was incredibly talented and respected, so much so that countless sects wanted him as a student, and he became the clan's leader at just 23 years old. Hua Mujin wasn't buying it. If he was really so great, he demanded to know why his energy core was completely broken, and more importantly, why did everyone treat him like he was crazy? Ma Sok looked terrified, stammering as he tried to find the right words to explain. His story began 17 years in the past. It was about a duel between two children, a fight with a special rule: no inner energy allowed. One of the boys was a 6-year-old Hua Mujin. He confidently challenged his opponent, a boy named Dobo, to a fair fight. His opponent was Chang Dobo, a 9-year-old who smirked and agreed to the terms. It would be a fair fight, with no tricks, and with that, the duel began. The two boys charged at each other instantly. Hua Mujin was fast. He landed a solid punch right across Dobo's face. The force of the blow sent the older boy flying backward, completely stunned. But Dobo wasn't going down that easily. He recovered, and the two of them went at it again, trading blows back and forth. Dobo was older and more experienced. He started blocking every single one of Hua Mujin's strikes. He knocked Hua Mujin to the ground and complimented his fighting style, calling him a genius. Hua Mujin just stared back, confused by the sudden praise. That's when Dobo's expression changed completely. He called Hua Mujin a fool as a bright blue energy started glowing in his fist. Hua Mujin's eyes went wide. He couldn't believe it. The energy blast hit him with incredible force, throwing him across the ground. He was barely able to get back on his feet. Blood dripped from his mouth. He looked up at Dobo and asked him why he'd used the 7 wounds fist strike. They were supposed to fight without any inner energy. Dobo stood over him, a smug look on his face. He mocked Hua Mujin, asking if he still considered him a friend after what he'd just done. He went on to explain that he'd used the 7 wounds fist strike. He said the after effects were brutal, even from a single hit. To prove his point, Dobo mentioned he'd recently tested it on a senior who was getting on his nerves. He bragged that just one punch was enough to leave the guy stuck in bed. Then, his fist started glowing with that same blue energy again. He lunged forward, throwing another energy-filled punch right at Hua Mujin. Suddenly, the scene changed. It was a memory. He finally understood why everyone thought the real Hua Mujin was insane. Turns out, it was all an after effect from being hit by that same 7 wounds fist strike in the past. He remembered now. The original Hua Mujin had been crippled by this attack, his energy core completely destroyed. And after all that, the attacker had shamelessly demanded a duel. He couldn't believe how messed up the whole situation was. His companion then explained that this had all been the decision of the former clan head. Masa confirmed that everything he'd said was true. He explained that Dobo wasn't just a cousin. He was the son of a powerful merchant group. Because of that influence, the clan head simply gave Dobo a light scolding and dropped the whole thing. Zhang Qian couldn't hide his disgust. He called the entire household pathetic. Then he asked a simple question. Where were these parents now? Ma Sok's expression turned grim. He couldn't even look him in the eye. He led Zhang Qian down a long, quiet hall. They stopped in front of a memorial altar. It was for Hua Mujin's mother. Ma Sok continued the story. He said that as Hua Mujin's condition got worse, his father went deep into debt, desperately trying to find a cure. 3 years later, crushed by the burden of it all, his father was gone too. Zhang Qian listened quietly, taking in the whole tragic story. So that was the truth. It wasn't just his parents. The entire clan blamed Hua Mujin for their downfall. In their eyes, he was the son who became the reason for his parents' deaths. Ma Sok explained that all that remained of the once proud clan were huge debts, a couple of loyal servants, and a handful of fighters. And then there were his younger siblings, his brother, Hua Dojin, and his sister, Hua Soyun. He remembered their words, how they screamed that it was all his fault their mother and father were gone. One sickness had destroyed the entire household. It all made sense now. No wonder the girl was so furious. The night grew quiet as he stood there, processing everything he had just learned. He closed the book. The story of Hua Mujin's life was done. He remembered the feeling of his old body, covered in the wounds of 100 battles. But this new reality was different. He was now Hua Mujin, the eldest son of a fallen clan, trapped in a body with no power at all. He thought back on his life as the divine demon. Everyone he needed to deal with, he dealt with. He had left no unfinished business. Then he found some old drawings. They were from his new brother and sister, wishing for him to get well soon. Siblings. The idea was completely foreign to him. Their situation was tragic. He sighed. It seemed he had to live this life now. He decided he would help these kids, even if it was just a little. His sister still held on to those drawings, a memory of a time before everything fell apart, and he knew exactly who was responsible for all this. The Changhua merchant group. They were the ones who had crippled this body and ruined the Flame Hua clan. He had a duel coming up with Cheng Dobo. The date was set. To have any chance, he needed to rebuild this weak body, at least to a beginner level. He smiled to himself. It looked like he had to start over from the very beginning. So, he sat down and prepared to begin. The whole situation felt familiar. It reminded him of the very first time he ever learned martial arts. He closed his eyes and focused. Immediately, his inner energy began to stir. He quickly realized something incredible. This new body had an amazing natural talent for martial arts. Normally, a beginner would have to spend ages just learning to sense energy. But for him, that step wasn't even necessary. For the divine demon, just closing his eyes was enough. A massive wave of energy erupted from his body. The force was so strong, it lit up the entire clan's estate. And just like that, 1 month passed. Far away, a man suddenly felt a strange shift in the air. Something had just happened. On the floor lay a man in a red robe. He wasn't moving. One of the men stared down at the body, shouting with relief. The target was finally gone. The old man finished checking his pulse. He joked that Hua Mujin was fine, but then his face turned serious. In fact, his pulse was stronger than it had ever been. The old man couldn't understand why he was so healthy. Hua Mujin explained that something was wrong with his body. He had tried to form an energy core, but the pain was unbearable. Hua Mujin asked if his body had some kind of special constitution. The old man confirmed it, telling him he possessed the heavenly martial body. He explained that it was a rare, heroic constitution, chosen by the heavens. It was something he'd only heard about from a Shaolin elder. But just as he said that, Hua Mujin suddenly coughed up blood. The old man panicked, explaining that this type of body causes so much pain that it could be fatal. He yelled for Hua Mujin to pull himself together, wondering why he was cursed with this specific constitution. Lying there, Hua Mujin remembered the duel. It was just over a month away. With a body that was actively trying to destroy itself, he knew this was really bad. As he lay there, another clan member came over with his little brother. The man asked who the elders were that had just been there. His brother explained they were the clan's chief steward and another elder. As the chief steward, Do Baekshin, walked away, he wondered why everyone looked so upset that the eldest son had collapsed. The other elder, Zhou Huanbong, warned that Hua Mujin's condition was getting worse. He said it was the rain fell hard that night. His younger siblings rushed to his side, calling out his name in panic. An attendant rushed over, asking if he was all right. Hua Mujin realized he'd been out for 3 whole days. At this rate, he knew he'd never even make it to the duel. He snapped at the man to be quiet. His head was pounding. Then he pointed at one of the clan members and ordered him to go get a few swords right away. The man looked panicked. He explained they were already struggling just to find food. There was no money for swords. He was right. Their debt was huge, all because of the crazy interest rates they were being charged. Hua Mujin knew what he had to do. Before anything else, he had to fix their money problems. Hua Mujin suggested that since their debt was already huge, a little more wouldn't really hurt. The attendant couldn't believe what he was hearing, but Hua Mujin cut him off, ordering him to stop talking and write a letter to the 2 elders. With that settled, he told the man he was just going out for a walk. A short time later, inside the elder's room, one of the elders read the letter and was completely stressed out by what it said. He and the other elder discussed the situation, worried that another sect might try to make a move against them. But Hua Mujin wasn't waiting for anyone's approval. He had gone straight to the source of their problems, the loan sharks of the Bangho sect. He walked right up to the guard and told him to pass a message to his leader. He announced himself as Hua Mujin of the Flame Hua sect, and he was here for a meeting. The guard, Kong Noho, wasn't impressed. He told Hua Mujin that if he was here to gamble, he should cut the talk and get inside. But Hua Mujin didn't back down. He asked why he couldn't see the leader and demanded to be taken to his superior. The guard was furious at the disrespect. He just stared the guard down, taunting him. The guard clenched his jaw, his patience clearly gone. But instead of fighting, Hua Mujin did something strange. He flipped a coin high into the air. Everyone on the street stopped, their eyes fixed on the spinning gold. Suddenly, a hand shot out and snatched the coin from the air. A new voice asked Hua Mujin why he wanted to see their leader. This was Ma Zhongbo, the vice leader of the Bangho sect. He looked Hua Mujin over, assuming he was just another customer. Hua Mujin looked at the vice leader and changed his mind. He said if that was the case, then there was no need to see the leader. The scene suddenly shifted to a dark, rainy night. This was a memory. A group of men were crossing a shaky bridge. One of them called out to their young master, warning him that he had a really bad feeling about this. But the young master, his face wrapped in bandages, just stared ahead. He dismissed the warning, asking why they would turn back after coming all this way. Someone started telling a story about the Bangho sect. A few days ago, they saw them fight a lone martial artist. In the blink of an eye, the man's chest was split wide open. The storyteller said the one responsible was a master of a very specific martial art. The other man was confused by the technique's long name, so the storyteller repeated it. The Black Hand Twin Killer Power, Heavenly Martial Moon Slaying Arts. And then 2 chopsticks flew through the air, spinning with incredible speed. They moved just like the coin Hua Mujin had flipped only moments before. The memory continued. They were trapped in a dark place, surrounded by coins. A man looked down on them from above, mocking the young master for being slow to understand the situation. The young master's eyes narrowed. He was starting to see what was really going on. Suddenly, a group of armed men appeared, their swords drawn. The man gave the order to begin. With a sword pointed at him, the young master asked if this was a trap from the very beginning. The man just smirked, enjoying the moment. He held up a candle and insulted him, saying he had no shame for not paying his debt. Then he brought up the young master's parents, accusing them of being leeches too. One of his men fell to the ground, begging them to spare the young master's life. But the young master only focused on one thing, the insult to his parents. He looked up, his voice cold. He told the man he didn't have any parents. For a moment, the face of the divine demon seemed to appear right behind him. The man grunted, his eyes wide with shock. He never saw it coming. He hit the ground hard and screamed in rage, accusing them of playing tricks. Hua Mujin just told him he had soft bones for a man his size. He knew that with this weak body, he couldn't rely on pure power. He had to use technique. The man with the scar watched, completely unfazed. He simply pointed forward. He gave the order to finish him. Another man in a red cloak charged, his blade swinging down. But Hua Mujin was faster. He moved like a blur, deflecting every single strike. The attacker grew angry, calling him a rat as he dodged every move with ease. He knew he couldn't match the man's power. His only chance was to stay mobile. The man in red landed a clean shot right across his face. The force sent Hua Mujin flying backwards, blood spraying from his mouth. But the attacker didn't give him a second to recover. He lunged forward again. That's when Hua Mujin did something impossible. He twisted his body midair and kicked out, catching the man completely off guard. He used their own momentum against them, sweeping through the group and taking them all off their feet. He moved in a blur, landing a crushing blow on the next man. The force of his attack sent them both flying, their swords clattering to the ground. In just a few seconds, they were on the ground, unable to move. The guard stared, his face a mix mix of shock and disbelief. As Hua Mujin walked away, the man shouted, demanding to know where he learned martial arts like that. Hua Mujin just told him he was fine. He held up 2 chopsticks, still glowing with energy. He claimed he learned everything he knew on the streets. But then, a new figure appeared, his body surrounded by a dark, powerful energy. It was the vice leader of the Bangho sect, Ma Zhongbo. He challenged Hua Mujin to try and dodge his next attack. The vice leader's aura exploded outwards, filling the area with immense pressure. He drew his sword, and the blade glowed with the same intense purple light. His grip tightened on the hilt. This was a real opponent. The vice leader looked down at the fallen guards and ordered them to get lost. He said he would take care of Hua Mujin himself. The vice leader told him he wasn't worthy of meeting their leader. He made it clear that Hua Mujin wasn't allowed to meet anyone else. Without another word, they both lunged at each other. Their weapons crashed together in a burst of purple and blue light. He casually noted that his chopsticks were a pretty good substitute for a real sword. The fight was a blur of motion and clashing energy. Hua Mujin realized the rumors were true. The vice leader was using a martial art he'd never seen before. The vice leader tightened his grip. He was starting to take this seriously. In the middle of the clash, Hua Mujin found a gap. He didn't just block the sword. He stabbed the vice leader's hand with his chopsticks. The vice leader was stunned. He couldn't believe someone had blocked his sword with chopsticks and actually found an opening to attack. He was furious. The vice leader started swinging his sword wildly, trying to overwhelm Hua Mujin. But Hua Mujin was way too fast. He dodged the clumsy attack without even trying. Then, Hua Mujin held up his chopsticks. Glowing blue discs of pure energy started forming all around him. He pushed his hands forward, sending the blast of energy straight at the vice leader, who could only grunt in pain as it hit him. The attack cut deep. The vice leader couldn't understand how this kid had gotten so strong so fast. He remembered hearing about the Hua clan's debts, but he never imagined they had someone like this. Hua Mujin stood over him and mocked him for trying to take money from them with such terrible skills. The vice leader just grunted, clutching the chopsticks still stuck in his side. The vice leader decided he was done playing around. He lunged forward, swinging his sword with everything he had. He gripped his sword tightly, channeling all his energy into it. His blade erupted in a violent purple flame. He was using his strongest technique. He called out the name of his ultimate move, the Heavenly Martial Moon Slaying Arts. A massive wave of dark energy shot down towards Hua Mujin, but Hua Mujin just watched it come, completely unfazed. At the last second, he stepped aside. The huge attack slammed into the ground, missing him completely. The vice leader couldn't believe his eyes. He thought there was no way anyone could dodge that. Before the vice leader could even process it, Hua Mujin was already throwing a punch. The punch landed right in the vice leader's stomach. A huge blast of energy erupted from the hit, sending the man flying backwards. The vice leader couldn't understand how this kid had so much hidden power. He glared up at Hua Mujin, completely beaten. Through gritted teeth, he cursed him and asked if he had any idea what he'd just started. Hua Mujin didn't care about the consequences. He just calmly told the man he was going to say it one more time. Standing over the defeated vice leader, surrounded by a dark red energy, he repeated his simple request. He just wanted to borrow some money. Fight was over, but for Hua Mujin, the feeling was just beginning. He hadn't felt this kind of joy in ages. It was a familiar feeling for his past self, the divine demon. Suddenly, a hand grabbed his wrist, trying to stop him. The man with him urgently warned him that this was a bad idea, but Hua Mujin just clicked his tongue, thinking what a waste it was. He turned his attention to the men from the merchant group. He told them to speak, demanding to know why they'd give his clan a loan when they hate losing money, especially a loan with nothing to back it up. He looked at them right in the eye and said he could sense their bad intentions. The merchant nervously tried to play it off. He stammered that Hua Mujin must be confused, asking why they would ever have bad intentions. Hua Mujin's patience was gone. He calmly explained that if he had to shove 30 dice down the man's throat, he wouldn't be able to speak at all. The threat hung in the air, heavy and silent. The man finally broke. He confessed that his orders came directly from the Changhua merchant group. His story went back to a secret meeting in a dark room. One of the men at the table started to speak. The man leading the meeting was brutal. He told the others to forget about being proud warriors. He made it clear that the merchants wouldn't care if their limbs got chopped off. Loyalty meant nothing to them. He finished with a final warning. If they failed, the entire place would be burned to the ground that very night. Even just remembering that threat made the merchant break out in a cold sweat. He continued explaining the plan. The Changhua merchant group told them to lend the Hua clan as much money as they needed, but with an impossibly high interest rate. The whole point of the loan was to force the Hua clan to fall. In exchange for making that happen, the conspirators would be paid a fortune. But it wasn't just about the money. They were also promised all of the Hua clan's land. And so, the contract was passed on to the people who would carry out the dirty work. The deal was set in motion. The man in charge looked over the document. He reminded his men that they were the ones who cleaned up the messes of the powerful. His men were discussing the other powerful groups involved. They mentioned that a new sect had recently joined the Four Martial Heavens. Hearing this, The young master scoffed, thinking that the four martial heavens were nothing but trouble. One of his men leaned in, confused. He asked how the young master could know anything about them when he'd never met them before. That night, under the cover of a storm, one of the men rushed to make a delivery. He arrived at a quiet room and set the heavy chest down. The money was ready. The man with the bandaged face opened the chest. A wide grin spread across his face. It was filled with gold coins. This was exactly what he needed. He told his companion it was time to go. The other man stammered, nervously asking if they were really just borrowing the money. The man in the straw hat cut him off, ordering him to be quiet and just take it. They headed out into the stormy night, making their way to another building. A group of men in orange cloaks met them outside. The bandaged man told them to write down the loan on their books. He promised he would come back and pay the debt. But first, he had to settle things with the Changhua merchant group. Then he added something else. He noted that it looked like they were taking a lot of money from poor peasants. He clenched his fist and gave them a serious warning. If they crossed the line, he would make them regret it. He let out a long sigh. With that business handled, he could finally move on. He walked back to the Hua clan headquarters, his mind already on the next fight. Just as he arrived, one of the clan elders came rushing out, shouting his name. The man's eyes widened when he saw the blood on Hua Mujin's clothes. Hua Mujin just told him not to worry, explaining that it wasn't his. The elder demanded to know if he'd gotten into a fight with the Bangho sect. Hua Mujin calmly replied that he'd just borrowed some money since he heard the clan was in need. He explained that they needed to feed their martial artists properly. He couldn't have everyone just running away. His companion set down the chest full of gold. Hua Mujin added that he made sure they wrote it down as a proper loan. With that, he turned and walked away into the night, leaving the men to stare at the gold. He just wished them good luck. The clan members just watched as he walked away, leaving them with the chest of gold. The elders didn't look happy. They clearly didn't approve of how he handled things. Later, in a quiet room, a single candle sat unlit. A match was struck, and the wick caught flame. Hua Mujin landed silently inside, the room now lit by lanterns. His face was still wrapped in bandages, a reminder of the body he was stuck in. He found his younger siblings and told them not to worry. He explained that the money problems were handled and that he would take care of everyone. But then, he told them he'd promised to fight someone named Chang Dobo in a few days. The fight was for one of their clan's secret scrolls. He thought about the upcoming duel. He wasn't just planning to win. He was going to break the guy's neck. The next few days passed quietly. The night before the fight was calm and silent, and then the sun rose on the day of the duel. But instead of preparing for a fight, something strange was happening in the courtyard. Men were carrying in huge, heavy wooden beams. They dropped the heavy wood onto the stone tiles. One of the men wondered what on earth Hua Mujin had ordered. They stretched their backs, getting ready for whatever was coming next. Just then, Hua Mujin stepped out into the courtyard. He looked at the materials and asked if everything had arrived. The wooden beams had their weights carved right into them. 50 jin, 80 jin, and even one that was 110. Everything he ordered was there. One of the men asked why he bought all this stuff, mentioning that even the warriors had a hard time carrying it. But Hua Mujin wasn't looking at the beams. He was staring at a huge sword. He reached for it, asking what else a person would do with a sword. He said he was going to swing it, and decided to start with an easy 50 jin. But when he tried to lift it, he couldn't even get it off the ground. The weight was too much, and he stumbled forward. He collapsed onto the floor. He couldn't believe how weak this body was, but he wasn't done yet. He tried again, putting every bit of his strength into it, but the sword barely moved. He could hardly pick it up even with both hands. He looked at the man, Masak, and told him to stop staring and do as he was ordered. As he struggled with the massive sword, he added that he wanted lots of meat in his meals from now on. Masak just watched him, clearly confused by his young master's sudden change. He gripped the sword tight. He only had 2 weeks before the duel. He realized his old demonic arts were useless in this new body. It was the polar opposite of what he was used to. His only choice was to learn a totally different style, one that belonged to his master's friend, the peerless 9 swords. So without wasting a single moment, he began to practice. He poured all of his focus into the new movements. He knew this was his only way out. It was the only way he'd survive the duel. As he practiced, Hua Mujin was genuinely amazed. This sword style was unlike anything he'd ever imagined. Far away, a man named Chang Dobo was playing an instrument when he received a surprising report. He asked for confirmation, wondering if it was true that Hua Mujin had beaten up the Bangho lackeys. His subordinate confirmed it. According to the letter he received, the men were beaten so badly they wouldn't be able to move for nearly 2 weeks. Hearing this, a wicked grin spread across Chang Dobo's face. This wasn't bad news to him at all. It was interesting. Meanwhile, Hua Mujin's training continued, each swing getting faster and sharper. Chang Dobo looked forward to their fight. He was eager to see the hidden side of Hua Mujin for himself. Behind him, a blindfolded swordsman stood waiting. The forms of the peerless 9 swords were complex and demanding. Hua Mujin practiced them over and over, pushing his body through each movement. He poured every bit of his energy into each swing. The force of his movements was so intense, the ground cracked beneath his feet. He stared at his reflection, covered in bandages. He told himself that if this body was a gift from the heavens, it had to be able to handle this much pain. But his training wasn't just physical. He had prepared dozens of scrolls, likely containing knowledge knowledge he needed to master. He saw that Ma Sok had brought everything he'd asked for, including a chest full of powerful herbs to help his body recover. He took a deep breath, exhausted but focused. The warm-up was over. The real training was about to begin. He planted his foot firmly on the ground, preparing for the first move. This was the solitary 9 swords. He moved into the first form, the declaration form. He put every ounce of his being into the swing, moving with a speed his body shouldn't have been able to handle. His movements were fluid, creating a whirlwind of energy around him. He was pushing himself far beyond his normal limits, his focus unbreakable. Each slash cut through the air with incredible force, but his body couldn't keep up. He felt something inside him start to break. He was furious. He couldn't believe he was already reaching his limits from just this much training, but he wasn't going to stop. He kicked a small ball into the air, using it as a target. Then he unleashed a storm of slashes, moving faster than the eye could follow. The air filled with a web of light as he practiced the forms over and over. Far away, Chang Dobo seemed to sense the power his rival was unleashing. Back in the training hall, Hua Mujin's blade found its mark every single time, but the training was taking a serious toll on his body. Still, he pushed himself, gathering all his strength for one final move, but it was too much. He collapsed, crying out as a sharp pain shot through his back. He slammed his fist into the ground, furious with his own weakness. But he didn't stay down. He got up and faced a machine that fired dozens of bamboo poles right at him. With a single, clean swing, he cut through every single one of them. He was mastering the breaking form. Its purpose was simple. No other martial art could stand before its edge. It was a natural counter, designed to defeat any complicated technique thrown his way. He moved on to sparring. His opponent couldn't believe it. Not a single one of their attacks could land. The attackers slammed their staff down in frustration, but Hua Mujin was always one step ahead. Then came the next test. Massive wooden logs dropped from the ceiling. He stood blindfolded, sword at the ready. This was the sky-cleaving form. In a flash, his blade moved, cutting through the falling logs. He spun in a whirlwind of steel, slicing every single one before they could hit the ground. The pieces fell harmlessly around him. The test was a success, but then a stray piece of wood smacked him right on the head. He let out a groan of pain. He gritted his teeth, absolutely enraged by the whole situation, but he didn't stop. He just moved on to the next challenge, a room filled with candles. This was the army slaughtering form. The goal was to put out the flames with the wind from his sword without touching a single candle. He moved on to the next form, 1 slash, parts still water. He unleashed a series of strikes against the training dummy, each one faster than the last. The training was brutal, pushing his weak body to its absolute limit. Then came the 8th form, the heaven sundering form. It was a move so powerful, it was said to be able to split the sky itself. He brought the blade down with all his might. With that final strike, he understood. He had mastered the forms, but in doing so, he felt he had lost the reason to even hold a sword. He closed his eyes, and a memory from long ago surfaced. It was a memory of a different time, a different life. His master had asked if he'd memorized the sword style. The young boy replied that he had, but he questioned if such an unworthy style could even be called a true sword art. The young boy was completely unimpressed. He complained that the explanations for the sword style were cringy, saying it sounded like something a kid made up to sound cool. His master didn't deny it. He explained that this sword style was the legacy of a close friend, and since he couldn't carry it on himself, he wanted the boy to take it up instead. He told the boy that this friend was the only swordsman who could ever stand toe-to-toe with him. The young student was stunned, asking how that was possible for someone with no inner power. The master guessed he probably used a technique called moving internal skill. He also said his friend insisted it be passed to an outsider because those in his own sect couldn't learn it properly. The boy just laughed, questioning why anyone would use a trash tier method like that. Finally losing his patience, the master told him to shut up and just accept it. The boy sighed and reluctantly agreed. He then explained what his friend had told him. 1,000 swings would change his body. At 100,000, he'd start to give off a sword aura, and after 1,000,000 swings, almost no one in the world could match him. The boy then asked if his friend was truly as strong as his master. The master admitted he couldn't say for sure, but he knew that if they ever fought to the end, one of them would definitely not survive. The boy looked up at the night sky. For the first time, he was actually curious about what kind of man his master's friend had been. Back in the present, Hua Mujin's body finally gave out. He collapsed in the middle of his training. His attendant rushed over, worried that he wasn't getting up. Annoyed, Hua Mujin warned him that if he hit him one more time, he'd deal with him later while eating. He was frustrated with himself. He couldn't believe he fainted after just one sword form, not even reaching 1,000 swings for the day. He still had a long road ahead. He looked down at the plate of meat and rice. This was the fuel he needed. The attendant reminded him that this was the meat he had asked for yesterday. Hua Mujin told him to make it beef starting tomorrow, explaining that it builds muscle better. The attendant was stunned. He said if money was an issue, they could borrow it. He made it clear that until he fought Changdobo, he would be eating 3 meat meals every single day. The attendant watched him, completely baffled. He finally asked asked the young master when he had started learning martial arts. Hua Mujin just looked back and asked why he thought it was weird. The attendant explained that just a short while ago, Hua Mujin was a guy who couldn't even function like a normal person. But now, he was practicing a sword style so powerful, it looked like something out of a legend. The intense training was pushing his weak body to its absolute limit, causing it to tremble uncontrollably. Hua Mujin considered just telling him the truth, that he wasn't the real Hua Mujin at all, but the divine demon himself. He pushed the ridiculous thought away. His expression turned serious as he admitted there was only one thing he was truly worried about. He was afraid that as he became stronger, the original Hua Mujin's memories and personality would just fade away and disappear without a word. But the attendant completely misunderstood. He grabbed his collar in a panic, asking if Hua Mujin was planning on abandoning the clan. Hua Mujin gently placed a hand on the attendant's shoulder to calm him down. He told him he would never abandon the clan. In fact, he promised to make it the strongest martial family in Sichuan. Besides, he didn't really have anything else to do. The sun was rising, casting a light on his new goal. The attendant thought the idea was ridiculous, so Hua Mujin flicked him right on the forehead. A huge bump instantly appeared, and the attendant just stood there, completely stunned. Hua Mujin, now sitting with his tea, told him to get out if he was done talking. The attendant quickly agreed and started to leave. He watched him go, his face still wrapped in bandages. But inside, the divine demon was thinking, becoming the strongest in Sichuan. That was a goal he could get behind. It would be enough for the original Hua Mujin too. He sat quietly, pouring himself some tea. Meanwhile, miles away, an attendant was giving a report. He announced that the duel between Chengdobo and young master Hua was just 10 days away. Back at the Hua clan estate, one of the elders was talking with someone, his face full of worry. He was convinced Chengdobo would try to end Hua Mujin's life during the duel, just to get his hands on the Yom Emperor's inheritance. He spoke with absolute certainty, his voice firm. The person he was speaking to seemed to doubt him, but the elder just told him to think carefully about what was at stake. He looked towards Hua Mujin's younger siblings. He explained that they couldn't afford to let the last two heirs of the family be harmed. Later that night, Hua Mujin stood in the pouring rain, his greatsword planted firmly in the ground before him. He had finally gotten strong enough to swing the heavy glint iron sword with one hand, but all that power meant nothing if his technique was still this unstable, and he was running out of time. The martial arts competition was only a week away. Just then, a small voice called out his name. It was his younger brother, peeking from the doorway. His little sister was there too. He turned and asked what they were doing out here so late. He told them it was dangerous and that they should go play somewhere else, but she didn't move. Instead, she asked if he was pushing himself this hard because of what she'd said to him before. A memory flashed in his mind of her screaming that it was his fault their parents were gone. Hua Mujin was completely caught off guard. He hadn't expected her to be worried about him. He looked at his younger siblings. Seeing them always reminded him of other kids from long ago. He reached out and gently rested his hands on their heads. His little brother suddenly tried to copy his fighting stance, but his sister pointed out that it wasn't quite right. Hua Mujin stretched his arm out more. Hua Mujin watched them, a small smile on his face. He realized the boy was trying to imitate him. The two kids kept arguing about whose stance was better. Seeing them play like this reminded him of his own training with his master. Down below, his brother was trying to show his sister the proper way to stand. He remembered his master's words perfectly. He was taught to breathe out when swinging the sword, hold his breath, and then breathe in slowly when returning to his stance. That's when it hit him. It was the breathing method of the pupil. Somehow, in all his training, he had completely forgotten his master's most important words. He tightened his grip on the sword. He looked at his siblings and told them not to worry about a thing. He promised them he would definitely win. With that, he gently waved for them to go back inside. The two kids just stared, a little surprised, and the door slid shut, leaving them alone in the quiet hallway. His sister asked if he thought everything would really be okay. He tried to sound sure, but they were both worried. Later that night, a heavy rain began to fall. The Hua Mujin was still out there, training through the storm. His focus was absolute. He remembered his master's lesson. First, hold your breath. Then, as he returned to his starting position, he was supposed to breathe in. It was all coming back to him now. He poured every last bit of his internal energy into a single, explosive swing. The training logs exploded into pieces. He had done it. It was a success, but the power came at a cost. His body was trembling, pushed to its absolute limit. That's when he remembered a lesson from long ago. He recalled the steps, the movements he had practiced over and over. The technique he was using, called pupil, was considered a lower-class martial art. Compared to other methods, no one expected it to lead to any real power. He remembered practicing day and night, even in the pouring rain, but there was a secret to awakening its true power, something important that everyone else had missed. The secret wasn't in the swing itself. It was all about a stable breathing method. He focused his mind, took a single, steadying breath, and unleashed a powerful strike. Before, every swing was a struggle, but now, by matching his breathing to the sword technique, his body started to stabilize. The movements became smooth and powerful. He kept practicing over and over, feeling the energy build inside him. He trained for hours, repeating the technique again and again. Slowly, the internal energy that had been scattered for years began to gather and grow stronger. After the intense training, it was time to eat. A servant turned around, surprised to see the attendant standing there. The attendant was talking about Hua Mujin. He said the young master had become a completely different person. At first, he was so weak he kept collapsing, but now he didn't even seem tired. The training was clearly working. The servant looked pleased, but but Hua Mujin was on the floor, screaming dramatically about how he was going to die. The attendant just stood there, watching the whole thing. Elsewhere, an elder was rubbing his head, looking stressed. He couldn't understand how someone could recover so quickly, even with the best treatment. He told a younger man to report any problems directly to him. The attendant quickly agreed and rushed off. The elder watched him go, his face full of worry. But as soon as the attendant was out of sight, his expression changed completely. He had a nasty grin on his face, like he was planning something terrible. He found Hua Mujin in a room filled with broken bamboo sticks. Hua Mujin stood with his back to the door, holding his huge sword. Hua Mujin looked around at the mess and commented that the room was too narrow. The attendant was completely confused by his statement. He was covered in bandages and sweat, clearly pushed to his limit. With a confident grin, he declared that from now on, he would use the main training ground. It was a bright, clear day at the main training ground, but the mood there was anything but peaceful. A couple of warriors were standing around, and they did not look happy. Hua Mujin didn't seem to care. He walked straight onto the field with his attendant, announcing that they had guests. One of the men approached the warriors and told them that the young master was taking over the training ground. Their faces twisted in anger. That's when Hua Mujin planted his huge sword right into the dirt. He told them he needed a lot of room to train, so he'd be borrowing the field for a while. He suggested they go use the other one nearby. One of the warriors exploded with anger. He yelled that just swinging a sword doesn't make someone a martial artist, especially one who's never even seen a real fight. Hua Mujin saw the challenging looks in their eyes, but he didn't seem bothered. The other warrior, though, was clearly getting more and more angry. Just then, a man with a commanding presence stepped forward. It was Keolboin, the commander of the Yeonhwa clan's death squad. He ordered everyone to step back, announcing that Hua Mujin was about to begin his training. The warriors slowly backed away, but their eyes were still fixed on Hua Mujin. Keolboin walked right up to Hua Mujin. He looked him up and down and insulted him, calling him a talentless fool. Hua Mujin didn't flinch. He looked the commander dead in the eye and told him if he had a problem, he should say it to his face. He added that only cowards hide what they're thinking. The air in the training ground grew heavy. Hua Mujin stood his ground, his hand on his sword, ready for whatever came next. The commander stared back, his expression unreadable. Hua Mujin raised his sword. He declared that there was only one way to settle this. They had to fight it out. The commander finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. He told Hua Mujin that no matter how messed up things were, a warrior never draws their sword against the person who will one day lead the clan. He then insulted him, saying that dogs that bite don't bark, and that Hua Mujin's challenge was just the sound of a dog full of fear. Hua Mujin didn't say a word. He just took a step forward. His hand tightened on his sword as a powerful blue energy began to swirl around him. He drew the massive blade in a single, fluid motion, telling the commander that regret wouldn't do him any good now. Then he added that he wasn't the type to have regrets anyway. His hand tightened on the hilt, and the blade began to glow with a powerful blue energy. The commander barely had time to react. Hua Mujin swung his massive sword with incredible speed, and the other warriors couldn't believe what they were seeing. But Hua Mujin just grinned. He looked like he was having the time of his life. His sword crashed down, shattering the ground. The commander's blade was sent flying, landing point first in the dirt. Without pausing for a second, Hua Mujin launched himself into the air, aiming a kick right at the commander. He grabbed the commander by the head, stopping him dead in his tracks. One of the other warriors screamed, unable to accept what had just happened. But Hua Mujin wasn't done. He swung his sword again, unleashing a wave of pure energy. The commander could only watch, completely stunned by the young master's power. The commander screamed at Hua Mujin to stop dodging and face him with his sword. It was clear he was just playing with them, tossing the other warriors around like they were nothing. Hua Mujin looked down for a second, a small smile on his face. He agreed with him. It was time to stop playing. He lifted the massive sword over his shoulder, getting ready to use it for real. The commander tried to defend himself, but the attack was just a blur of steel. Hua Mujin's grip was firm and steady. The commander could only stare in disbelief. Hua Mujin scoffed, mocking him for daring to preach about martial arts. The commander gritted his teeth, absolutely furious. He charged forward, screaming at Hua Mujin to know his place. But Hua Mujin didn't even try to block with his sword. He just focused his energy, his eyes glowing with power. As the commander swung his blade, Hua Mujin met the attack with nothing but his bare fist. The commander froze. He couldn't believe it. Hua Mujin's technique was somehow shaking his own internal energy. Hua Mujin looked him dead in the eye and calmly told him that everything he'd said was true. Before the commander could even process the insult, a fist slammed into his face. It was a single, perfect punch, thrown without any hesitation. Hua Mujin stood there, his arm still extended from the blow. The commander hit the ground hard. He stared up, completely stunned, unable to understand how this was possible. He realized the weak boy he knew was gone. Hua Mujin's entire presence had changed. In that moment, the commander finally saw it. He wasn't looking at some weak kid anymore. He was looking into the eyes of a true warrior, burning with determination. The force of the blow sent him flying backwards, crashing into the dirt. The other warriors stared, their minds completely blown. They couldn't believe it. The young master had actually won. The commander's men rushed to his side, yelling out to see if he was all right. right. Ignoring the chaos, Hua Mujin walked to the center of the field and planted his massive sword into the ground. He stood there with his hand on his hip and asked if anyone else had any complaints. One of the warriors couldn't take it. He yelled out, calling him a coward. Hua Mujin just turned his head slightly and calmly asked him to explain why. The warrior exploded. He screamed that Hua Mujin had used a cowardly trick, attacking the commander when he was defenseless. But before he could finish, Hua Mujin moved. A flash of his blade, and the warrior was on the ground, clutching his bleeding leg. He immediately conceded defeat. The training ground fell completely silent. Hua Mujin stood there, his body covered in bandages from his intense training. The warrior bowed deeply, admitting he had learned his lesson. Hua Mujin simply told him to step down, and the man pledged his loyalty. With a wave of his hand, he dismissed everyone. The warriors left without another word, leaving Hua Mujin and his attendant alone on the field. The attendant looked worried, but Hua Mujin's expression was unreadable. He was already thinking about what came next. Later that day, things had quieted down at the clan's main building, but inside, the warriors were still talking about what happened on the training field. One of them was absolutely furious. An older warrior grabbed him, but not to calm him down. He admitted that he wasn't holding back to be nice. He was planning on seriously hurting the young master himself. The others were stunned by his honesty. As they walked away, they just couldn't make sense of it. The senior warrior walked on ahead, lost in his own thoughts. He was replaying the fight in his mind, the way the young master moved, the strange power he used. Another member of the clan brought up the biggest question on everyone's mind. When could Hua Mujin have possibly learned to fight like that? But in the end, he decided it didn't really matter. He figured that since the young master had changed, it was probably a good thing for everyone. Night had fallen over the Yomhwa clan's main hall. Inside, one of the clan's leaders stood alone, looking out into the darkness. He turned to Elder Joe and asked him how many years they had both been part of the clan. The question brought back a powerful memory of their old master, Lord Yomjae. He was a man who single-handedly brought the mighty Tang clan to its knees. They had all sworn their lives to him. Elder Joe listened, his face heavy with the weight of that promise. The leader insisted that what they were planning wasn't a betrayal. He said it was the only way to carry on their master's legacy and bloodline. Elder Joe quietly agreed. He thought about the last 17 years, all that time spent dealing with young Master Hua's strange behavior while watching their clan slowly fall apart. The leader let out a breath, saying that even if they met Lord Yomjae in the afterlife, they would have nothing to be ashamed of. The leader asked if preparations were complete. Elder Joe explained there wasn't much to prepare. All they had left was a little money, a handful of warriors, and 4 clan tokens. His expression was firm. He knew exactly what had to be done. The leader stared out into the hall and finally told Elder Joe to go ahead. He explained that someone needed to be there to handle the body and protect the bloodline. Elder Joe added a critical detail. A master hired by the Changhua Merchant Guild would be there to witness tomorrow's duel. The leader was furious, saying the guild was acting like theft was something to be proud of. He realized they were trying to make everything official. He called the Changhua Merchant Guild a bunch of snakes. He knew they wouldn't stop until the entire Yomhwa clan was wiped out, down to the last root. The leader gave his final order: go to the agreed spot and wait. The future of the clan rested on the 2 children, who were sleeping soundly, unaware of the danger. The next morning, Hua Mujin was having a quiet meal. He commented that the meat seemed tougher than usual. His attendant chewed with all his might, clearly struggling with the food. Hua Mujin asked if he was sulking. The attendant insisted he wasn't, but then asked why he told him to run, which only got him punched. Hua Mujin simply waved his hand, dismissing the complaint. He completely changed the subject. Standing up in his formal robes, he asked his attendant how he looked. The young man just stared back, looking completely unamused. Hua Mujin's playful look was gone. He stared at his companion, waiting for a serious answer. With his preparations done, he slid his sword into place. It was time to go. As Hua Mujin and his attendant were leaving, an elder from the clan stepped out to stop him. The look in his eyes was incredibly serious. Hua Mujin told them to wait there. He promised he'd be back after he was done beating the thieves from the merchant guild, but the elder refused to let him go alone, insisting that he was coming with him. Hua Mujin just stared at him, not saying a word. He thought to himself that the old man was worrying for nothing. After all, he was the one who was going to crush them. The sun rose on the day of the duel. The main gate swung open. Hua Mujin stood there, ready for what was to come. The announcement went out across the city. A martial duel was set between the Changhua Merchant Company and the Yomhwa family. A huge crowd gathered in the courtyard where the fight would happen. People were already talking about the odds and placing their bets. The bookies were busy, checking their ledgers to set the odds for the fight. One man stepped up and put 2 silver coins on the Yomhwa family's young master. The people around him just laughed. Betting on the Yomhwa family was clearly seen as a foolish move. That's when Hua Mujin arrived. He just stood there, casually eating a piece of candy. The moment he saw him, the man who had just bet on the Yomhwa family tried to cancel his wager, but Hua Mujin and the elder didn't seem to care at all. They just stood there, enjoying their candy together. Just then, a woman carrying a red umbrella arrived. She greeted them like an old friend. She closed her umbrella with a snap, her expression completely serious. She joined the men from the Changhua Merchant Company. They were whispering among themselves, shocked that the Yomhwa family had been the ones to demand the duel. Hua Mujin just kept chewing his candy, completely unfazed by all the talk. The man who would be fighting him, Changdobo, just smirked. He accepted the challenge, ready for a fight. As the woman and Changdobo walked away, Hua Mujin and the elder watched them go. The crowd was confused, with people admitting they had no idea what was really happening. The woman's eyes suddenly glowed with a strange blue light. She was clearly more than just a simple witness. A torch was thrown into a brazier, and and flames erupted. The duel was about to begin. The dueling stage was set. Hua Mujin looked down at the arena from the platform above, clenching his fist. An announcer's voice boomed across the grounds, declaring that the witness for the duel was Han Ik-gong of the Gongdong clan. The man himself looked on with a serious expression, ready to ensure the fight was fair. Hua Mujin watched all of this, without a single change in his expression. The two fighters walked to the center of the stage, finally facing each other. His opponent, Chiang Dobo, smiled with his arms spread wide. He casually mentioned that he saw Hua Mujin had received the items they sent over. He pointed out the outfit Hua Mujin was wearing, identifying it as the Yomhua family's special battle uniform. Hua Mujin's hand tightened around the handle of his sword. Chiang Dobo finished his threat, saying that once the duel was over, Hua Mujin would have to return everything else his family owned. In response, Hua Mujin just drew his massive great sword, ready to fight. The crowd just stared, completely stunned. No one expected him to actually draw that massive sword. The two fighters stood on opposite ends of the stage, and the whole arena was silent, waiting for the duel to start. Meanwhile, one of the elders, Masoka, pulled Hua Mujin's attendant aside. He asked him if the young master had said anything strange before the duel. Masoka reminded the attendant that Hua Mujin had also told him to run away. The young man got defensive, insisting he was only joking and that he truly believed his master would win. The elder wasn't convinced at all. He wondered how someone could change so suddenly, and even started to think that maybe his master's madness was contagious. Back on the stage, the announcer raised his mallet. He shouted out, asking if both sides were ready to begin. Hua Mujin stood perfectly still, his eyes closed. He was completely calm, just waiting for the signal. His opponent, however, just smirked. Chiang Dobo looked at Hua Mujin like he was a joke, completely sure of his own victory. The announcer gave the signal. A loud clang echoed through the arena, and the duel began. Chiang Dobo didn't waste a second. He lunged forward, bringing his sword down with incredible force. But Hua Mujin met his strike head on. Chiang Dobo's eyes widened in surprise. He clearly wasn't expecting that much power. Sparks flew as their blades ground against each other. It wasn't just a simple block. It was a contest of pure strength. Everyone watching was speechless. The speed of the attack was one thing, but Hua Mujin's response was even more shocking. They couldn't understand it. They'd all heard he was a madman who knew nothing about martial arts. So where was all this power coming from? Chiang Dobo gritted his teeth, his confidence turning to frustration. This wasn't going how he planned at all. Realizing he couldn't win the power struggle, he jumped back to create some distance. He didn't just back off. Chiang Dobo came right back at him, and their swords met again in a flurry of strikes. They were moving so fast, it was just a blur of steel and sparks. A blade just barely grazed Hua Mujin's cheek, drawing a bit of blood. But the exchange ended with a huge burst of energy that shook the entire arena. For a second, they just stood there, locked in a stare. The fight wasn't just about swords anymore. The crowd was loving it. They were all laughing and drinking, treating this life or death duel like a festival. Back in the ring, the fight was as fierce as ever. But someone in the crowd, watching from under a red umbrella, was starting to get suspicious. They were surprised Hua Mujin was holding on this well. The thing is, they realized Hua Mujin's martial arts were nothing special. Compared to all the training Chiang Dobo had, his moves were simple. It just didn't make any sense. But Chiang Dobo wasn't thinking about any of that. He just kept pressing his attack, swinging his sword with everything he had. And then, in a flash, Hua Mujin caught him. He grabbed Chiang Dobo right by the throat. With a powerful twist, Hua Mujin slammed Chiang Dobo straight into the ground. He didn't give him a second to recover, raising his huge sword for another attack. The sword came crashing down, and the impact was deafening. Chiang Dobo managed to get his blade up just in time, but the force behind the blow was immense. Hua Mujin put every bit of his strength into that one push. Chiang Dobo glared back, absolutely furious. He threatened that this time, he'd leave Hua Mujin crippled. But Hua Mujin wasn't just trying to win. He knew that truly crushing someone's will was a different thing entirely. In that moment, his eyes began to glow a deep red. This was about to get serious. Their swords met in a flash of red and blue light. The force of the impact was huge, shaking the entire area. Hua Mujin felt the pressure building. He was barely holding on against the other guy's strength. From the stands, one of the spectators couldn't believe his eyes. He shouted that Hua Mujin wasn't even fighting at full strength yet. The older man just listened as his companion tried to make sense of what he was seeing. Chiang Dobo was the one getting pushed back now, the stone wall behind him starting to crack. He realized their power levels felt about the same, and he had clearly underestimated how much Hua Mujin had grown. Hua Mujin wiped the sweat from his face. This body was still weak, but that didn't matter. He remembered his past life. It didn't matter if his opponent was stronger or weaker than him. He always finished the job, and this fight would be no different. He was going to end it. Hua Mujin's resolve hardened. He knew this wasn't just about winning anymore. He had to finish this. They rushed at each other, a blur of red and blue energy, each one aiming for the final blow. Far away from the fight, a journey was underway. Someone was walking with purpose. The fight was over. One man lay on the ground, completely exhausted, while the other stood by the cart. A man with a horse-drawn cart finally reached his destination, letting out a sigh of relief. He thought about the 2 children he'd brought with him. Thankfully, they had slept through the entire trip, which made things much easier. As the sun began to set, a serious conversation was about to begin. The older man asked the cart driver if he was really staying behind. He explained that someone had to remain to gather the remains of their relative. With a heavy look, the chief steward declared that he would personally oversee young Master Hua's final journey. The other man told the chief steward to go on ahead. They would meet later at the promised location. As he watched the other man leave, the chief steward let out a heavy sigh. He wasn't sure if they were doing the right thing. Meanwhile, the duel was still raging. Hua Mujin and Chang Dobo met in midair, and their blades crashing together. The fight was a blur of steel. The crowd realized Chang Dobo was fighting at the level of a sword demon, which was unheard of for someone his age. Their next clash sent a massive shockwave of energy blasting through the arena. The people watching could barely keep up. They were sweating, completely floored by the power on display. From the stands, the two fighters looked like forces of nature, clashing in the center of a silent, watching crowd. Chang Dobo was giving it everything he had, gritting his teeth as he pushed past his limits. Chang Dobo let out a furious scream, putting every last bit of his energy into one final downward strike. The crowd panicked, screaming for young Master Hua to dodge. They were sure this was the end, but Hua Mujin didn't move back. He took one single, deliberate step forward. He met the attack head on. Their blades crashed together in a huge explosion of sparks. The crowd was in total shock. They couldn't believe he'd actually blocked it. Chang Dobo grunted, pushing with all his might, but it was no use. His attack had been completely stopped. Then Hua Mujin started to push back. The ground beneath them cracked under the incredible pressure. A small, confident smile appeared on his face. The fight had just turned. He pushed with all his might, a confident grin on his face. Chang Dobo was completely outmatched. Forced backwards, Chang Dobo realized he had one last chance. He began to gather all the energy he had left for a final, desperate attack. From the stands, the crowd watched nervously. They could see Chang was putting everything he had into this last move. Everyone knew this was it. This had to be his final strike. But Hua Mujin just watched, unimpressed. He taunted Chang, telling him he was too slow. Then, Hua Mujin unleashed his own technique, the Peerless Nine Swords. Second form, weapon destruction. Their blades met in a blinding flash of light. Chang's eyes went wide. He couldn't believe it. He was completely helpless against Hua Mujin's power. Hua Mujin's sword slammed down with incredible force. Chang's blade couldn't take it and began to shatter. Chang was furious. He couldn't believe he was losing to someone he thought was just an energy-less nobody. In an instant, his sword completely broke apart. All that was left was the hilt. He was completely defenseless. But Hua Mujin wasn't finished. He immediately swung again, pressing his advantage. The blade cut deep. Chang could only look on in shock as he began to fall backward. He didn't give him a second to recover, following up with a brutal kick straight to the chest. And with one last massive strike, he slammed Chang into the ground, ending the fight for good. The final blow was devastating. Chang's clothes were torn to shreds as he slammed into the ground, completely defeated. From the crowd, a woman screamed his name, her face twisted in disbelief and rage. The rest of the crowd was just as stunned. They could only stare, unable to believe what they'd just seen. Hua Mujin stood over his fallen opponent. Someone in the crowd finally whispered what everyone was thinking, asking if he had really won. But this wasn't just about winning. He reached down and grabbed Chang's arm. Then, he took the man's arm. He declared it was payment for a grudge he'd held for 17 years. The woman from before was horrified. She stammered, unable to comprehend what he'd just said. Hua Mujin just stood there calmly. He mocked them, saying that a powerful group like the Changhua Merchant Guild could probably find a way to reattach the arm. Then he kicked the lost arm away like it was nothing more than a piece of trash. As Chang lay on the ground in agony, a man in a green coat calmly walked toward the arena. The woman tried to run to Chang's side, but Hua Mujin blocked her path. He turned to face the man, his brutal sword still ready. The man told him the match was already over. Hua Mujin shot back that if they were going to talk now, he had plenty to say too. He brought up the past, asking if it was really necessary for them to use a deadly technique on a 5-year-old who knew no martial arts. His eyes glowed with pure rage. He declared that from now on, they would all pay the price for provoking the Hua clan. It was a warning. He told them to prepare themselves well for what was coming. With his warning delivered, Hua Mujin turned and leapt away, leaving them all behind. The woman just sat there on the ground, defeated. Her hand tightened, her knuckles turning white. She screamed his name, vowing that she would never, ever forget what happened here today. The crowd was in an uproar, completely stunned by what they had just witnessed. Then, their shock turned into cheers. They had never seen a fight like that before. People couldn't stop talking about it. He had crushed a disciple from a powerful sect in just a few moves, using a sword style no one had ever seen. As Hua Mujin walked away from the arena, his allies hurried to catch up with him, calling his name. He just looked at the older man and told him it was time to head back. After a moment of surprise, the man quickly agreed. As they walked, the chief steward couldn't help but stare. He wondered to himself if the young master's back had always looked so strong and reliable. Suddenly, Hua Mujin called out to him, and the chief steward flinched. Hua Mujin brought up that thing, and the steward's heart dropped. He panicked, wondering if his young master had already figured out their plan to run away. But Hua Mujin just smiled, clarifying that he was talking about the gold he had entrusted to him. As he walked past, he casually mentioned that with money being tight, he might have to stop by the bank soon. Then, Hua Mujin stopped and said he had one more thing to add. He told the steward that he didn't really care if people chose to leave the clan, but there was a condition. If anyone ever tried to separate him from his younger siblings, they would have to be ready to put their lives on the line. Meanwhile, somewhere else, the sun was setting. Turns out, Hua Mujin's younger siblings were furious with a large warrior. The little sister, sitting on his shoulder, yelled that it was her brother's duel day and she couldn't forgive him. The man nervously tried to explain, saying he just needed to read the message he'd received, but she wasn't interested in excuses. She just grabbed a handful of his hair and gave it a good yank. Since they were already talking about money, Hua Mujin brought up another idea. He said it was time for a debt party. The chief steward had no idea what he meant. Hua Mujin explained he was talking about the Bangho sect. He figured it was finally time to deal with them. Hua Mujin told the chief to rest, saying he'd handle everything himself. But the old man was still worried. He knew his young master was completely different now, but this was a huge risk. Hua Mujin told him he worried too much. The chief pleaded with him to at least stay away from the social sect, no matter what. Hua Mujin just waved him off, saying he got it, but it was clear he wasn't really listening. The chief could only watch as the doors closed, his advice completely ignored. Outside, Ma Sok couldn't believe it. He asked if the young master was really heading straight for the Bangho sect. Hua Mujin confirmed it, saying it was best to deal with trouble right away. He then turned to Ma Sok with a smirk. He told him that from now on, he needed to stay close. And just like that, they arrived. This was the headquarters of the Bangho sect, a group known for their shady money-lending business. The man in the large hat greeted Hua Mujin nervously. He never thought he'd see him again in this lifetime. Hua Mujin announced that he had come to pay back his debts. Ma Sok remembered exactly who he was dealing with, the man who had turned the son of a powerful merchant into a cripple. Hua Mujin looked around and sarcastically commented on how quiet the place was. He asked if their business had gone under. Ma Sok explained that it wasn't what it looked like. Turns out, most of the local gamblers had gone to watch the young master's duel. Hua Mujin immediately understood. He turned and asked if they had held betting pools on his match. The man was stunned that he'd figured it out so quickly. He walked right past them, saying he was sure the odds were high on his side. He knew they must have made a tidy sum from it. Sweating, Ma Sok had no choice but to admit that he was right. Hua Mujin's tone turned cold. He pointed out that they had made good money because of him, and he wanted to know if they were just going to stay silent. Ma Sok cursed under his breath, realizing he was being squeezed for money again. But he quickly told Hua Mujin they were planning to show their gratitude. Hua Mujin said that was exactly what he wanted to hear. Ma Sok just stood there, completely silent. Ma Sok couldn't believe it. This wasn't the same young master he knew. The air around him was cold, filled with a killing intent even stronger than a seasoned martial master's. Hua Mujin cut straight to the point. He asked where the boss was. He slammed his hand down on the table, making it clear he didn't like repeating himself. A moment later, a man appeared. He was Che Wungdeo, the leader of the Bangho sect. The sect leader looked Hua Mujin up and down. He said his men had told him about the visitor, and he mocked him for making things difficult. Then, he pointed to the man standing behind Hua Mujin, dismissing him as just some lackey. Suddenly, another man appeared out of nowhere, surrounded by a strange energy. He was the Death Black Crow of the social sect. He sneered at Hua Mujin, asking if he was the one trying to take his money. Hua Mujin wasn't fazed. He recognized the man as a member of the social sect. Instead of looking worried, a small, confident smile spread across his face. The Death Black Crow didn't wait. He leaped into the air, challenging Hua Mujin to try and stop him. The sect leader started to sweat. He clearly hadn't expected things to get this serious. Hua Mujin didn't even move from his spot. He just raised his hand, and a blade of red energy formed instantly. With a flick of his wrist, he sent the energy blade flying straight at his opponent. It was too fast. The blade went right through the Death Black Crow's head before he could even react. His body dropped to the floor. The energy blade flew back into Hua Mujin's hand as if it were nothing. Elder Joe stared at the blood on his hand. He had thought Hua Mujin was just some kid, but he was starting to realize this was no ordinary man. But Hua Mujin just looked at him with a bored expression. He told the old man that his threats meant nothing. That was the last straw. Elder Joe flew into a rage and charged straight at him. He slammed his fist into the ground with incredible force, but Hua Mujin wasn't there. Before the elder could even figure out what happened, Hua Mujin was already behind him, ready to strike. The two of them moved in a blur, their attacks clashing mid-air. But none of Elder Joe's attacks could land. He couldn't understand how some young brat was dodging him so easily. Hua Mujin just smiled, then asked if he should open up one more hole. With a flash of red energy, he struck the elder right in the face. The other men screamed in pain, completely shocked by the sudden attack. Hua Mujin stood over Elder Joe, mockingly asking if he could breathe better now. The old man, bleeding on the ground, could only curse at him. The elder tried to threaten him, warning that the social sect would come for revenge. But then, the old man made a mistake. He threatened Hua Mujin's family. Hua Mujin didn't even let him finish the sentence, kicking him square in the face. He scoffed at the mention of the social sect, telling them to come if they dared. He made it clear that whatever happened next, the elder wasn't leaving this place alive. Suddenly, the elder's attitude changed completely. He started begging for his life, offering up his wealth and everything he he owned just to be spared. Hua Mujin pressed his foot down, showing he was in complete control. He told the man he had no interest in his personal affairs, but the mention of wealth, that caught his attention. The man, tears streaming down his face, swore he would bring everything back. Hua Mujin's voice cut in, telling him that was the right attitude, but he followed it up with a chilling warning. If the man failed to return, he'd be breathing through holes in his face. With that settled, Hua Mujin turned his attention back to the elder. He asked with a cold smile if they should continue. Suddenly, another one of the men dropped to his knees, begging to be spared. Hua Mujin just looked down at him, completely unfazed. The elder watched, sweating and terrified. He knew he was next. Hua Mujin scoffed at the idea of an offer, telling the man his property was already his. The elder stammered, completely confused by his words. Hua Mujin began to list everything out. He mentioned the 7,000 gold nyang the man had squeezed out of commoners, then added the price for all the lives he'd ruined. He asked if that didn't just about equal all of the elder's assets. The elder finally broke. He stammered that he would give Hua Mujin everything he had. Hua Mujin didn't wait for an answer. He just moved. The elder collapsed, his offer of surrender completely ignored. Standing over the body, Hua Mujin coldly asked why the man kept trying to give him something that was already his. The other men from the sect watched in pure horror. They were completely frozen. Without missing a beat, Hua Mujin turned to the others and asked who was next in line. A trembling man in a straw hat stammered that he was the vice sect chief. The man immediately dropped to his knees, begging to be spared. He swore he'd live an honest life if Hua Mujin just gave him a chance. Hua Mujin sat down at a table and looked down at him. He calmly agreed to let the man live. The vice sect chief couldn't believe it, but his mercy came with a condition. He immediately got down to business, asking how much the dead elder's property was worth. The vice sect chief quickly explained that the Bangho sect's total assets were at least 10,000 gold nyang. He also mentioned a tribute of 500 gold nyang they owed to another sect. Hua Mujin started doing the math. He took the Bangho sect's total assets, added the leader's personal wealth, and even tacked on a huge fee for emotional damages. The final number came out to about 20,000 gold nyang. He decided that sounded perfectly fair. He handed the document to the vice sect chief and told him to get all the papers and gold ready right away. But once the sect's assets were dealt with, Hua Mujin wasn't finished. He turned to the other terrified members. He asked them if it was time to start negotiating the ransom for their lives. The men froze. He had promised to spare the vice sect chief, but he never said anything about sparing them. Back at the Hua clan's estate, the chief steward was screaming. He couldn't believe his eyes. The room was overflowing with chests of gold and treasure. Hua Mujin calmly explained that he'd just returned from a debt party. He looked completely satisfied with himself. The chief steward could barely get the words out. He just stared at the mountain of gold Hua Mujin had brought back. But the steward was terrified. He reminded Hua Mujin that the Bangho sect was backed by the Social sect. He then asked if his master knew who the Social sect was allied with. Hua Mujin didn't seem to care. So the steward frantically explained that the Crimson Sword sect's leader, Ju Sugang, was sworn brothers with the Death Black Crow. Instead of being worried, Hua Mujin just thought for a second. He casually asked if the Death Black Crow was the guy with the pitch black fingers. The chief steward was speechless. That was not the reaction he was expecting. Hua Mujin told him that while an enemy like that might be too much for others, he was on a different level. If trouble came looking for him, he'd simply wipe them all out. With that settled, he changed the subject completely. He asked for some tender beef for dinner and to make sure his siblings were fed well. The chief steward just stood there, trying to understand what was happening. The chief steward couldn't wrap his head around it. The Death Black Crow was feared by everyone, yet Hua Mujin spoke of him like he was nothing. He started to wonder if this was really the same young master he'd always known. Meanwhile, somewhere else, a meeting was taking place under the cover of darkness. Inside, a subordinate stood before a woman who was looking over a large map. She gave a cold, simple order. She didn't care who else got taken out in the process, but she made one thing crystal clear. There was one person who absolutely had to survive. Her target was Hua Mujin. Fire erupted from her hand as she crushed one of the pieces on the map. She swore she would tear apart everything he held dear right before his very eyes. The story of the Yonhwa clan is a long one, painted with both glory and ruin. There was a time when the clan was at its peak, and their training grounds were filled with warriors who had come from all over, drawn by the incredible skill of a man named Yomje. His character and skill were so great that even the powerful Tang clan of Sichuan spoke of him with respect. Under his leadership, the clan was strong and united. They were so powerful that other masters wouldn't dare challenge them. Whenever they walked the streets, the people would cheer. But everything changed after Yomje passed away. During the ceremony for the next clan head, the world quickly saw how useless the new leader was. With weak leadership, the Yonhwa clan began to fall apart. Even the most loyal members started to turn their backs and leave one by one. The image of Yomje, the man who once commanded the world, was slowly fading into nothing more than a memory. To his allies, Yomje was a kind hero. To his enemies, He was an unbeatable master. He was truly a legend. The chief steward watched him go, completely stunned. For a second, he saw the image of the great Yomje overlapping with the young master's back. Suddenly, chaos erupted. Assassins from the Changhua Merchant Guild had ambushed them, and men were dropping left and right. One of the clan's warriors screamed in terror. He explained that Elder Joe was fighting back, but there were just too many assassins. The young lord and lady were in danger. The clan members scattered, trying to fight back or find safety. The fight moved into the bamboo forest, turning into a desperate, brutal struggle. One of the assassins grabbed the young lady, holding a blade to her throat. He told the others to think carefully before they did anything. He laughed, warning them that if they tried anything stupid, he'd get rid of all the kids. One of the guards could only scream in fury, calling them bastards. Just as things looked their worst, a single, powerful slash cut through the chaos. One of the assassins froze in shock, caught completely off guard. Golden light flashed, and his men were thrown aside. The leader of the assassins watched, unfazed, and quietly warned the newcomer to back off. They realized another enemy had shown up. The assassins didn't hesitate, shouting orders to take him down immediately. But the newcomer was Hua Mujin. He moved like lightning, weaving between them. One of the assassins couldn't believe it. He complained that their only real opponent was supposed to be some old man, right before he was struck down. In the blink of an eye, even their leader was taken down. One of the clan's elders could only scream, watching the carnage unfold. One of the assassins lunged forward, his blade glowing as he swung at Elder Joe. The sword cut deep across his chest, but Hua Mujin was already moving, a blur of motion cutting through the chaos. The assassins didn't let up, landing another brutal strike on the old man. With a blade pressed against his throat, Elder Joe could only curse them. The assassin screamed that it was time to die and plunged his blade forward. The sword went straight through him. With the elder down, one of the attackers turned his attention to the children. He coldly wondered which one he should get rid of and which one he should take with him. The little boy stepped in front of his sister, trying to shield her. He glared at the attacker, not backing down. The assassin swung his sword down to finish it, but the boy just screamed that if anyone was going to die, it would be the attacker. And then an incredible scream erupted from him, so loud it seemed to shake the air. The sound was so powerful, it stopped the assassin in his tracks. Neither of them could believe what just happened. Suddenly, someone dropped from the sky, landing right in the middle of the fight. The assassins looked up in shock. They immediately recognized him. It was the mad demon, Mujin. The lead assassin didn't hesitate. He gave the order to his men. If Hua Mujin gets in the way, they are to take him out. But Hua Mujin was already moving. One of the assassins yelled that he had a death wish for interfering. Hua Mujin's expression was pure ice. He wasn't there to talk. The assassin's sword shattered the moment it met Hua Mujin's blade. He just stood there, completely stunned by the raw power of the block. Before he could even process what happened, a thin red line appeared across his mask. The other assassins watched in horror as Hua Mujin moved like a blur. They had no idea what they were up against. Realizing they couldn't fight him one-on-one, the leader screamed for everyone to attack him at the same time. They all charged in, but Hua Mujin didn't even flinch. He just readied his sword. That's when he unleashed the fifth form. A storm of red slashes erupted from his sword, wiping out everyone around him. The last few assassins could only look on in shock before they collapsed. The fight was over in an instant. Just when it looked like it was over, one last assassin charged forward. He brought his sword down with everything he had, aiming to finish Hua Mujin on the ground. But Hua Mujin wasn't worried. He just stared back up at the blade with a calm, almost bored expression. In a flash of red light, he twisted his body, and his sword met the attacker. The force of the blow sent the assassin flying back. In his last moments, he realized he wasn't fighting a person. He was fighting a monster. There was nothing he could do. He just stared in shock as the blade came for him. With the last one down, Hua Mujin stood in the silence, surrounded by bodies. He gave a cold warning to not even twitch if they wanted to live. He stood there for a second, his clothes splattered with blood, and stared into the trees. Turns out, his little sister was hiding there, and she had just seen everything. Her voice was shaking as she called out to him. Suddenly, a hand covered her eyes, trying to shield her from the sight. It was her brother. He told her that Hua Mujin had dealt with the bad guys, and that's exactly why she shouldn't look. Hua Mujin walked towards them, his expression softening as he asked if they were okay. Hua Mujin told him he must have been scared, but the little boy puffed out his chest and insisted he wasn't, because he was from a martial family. Hua Mujin just gently placed a hand on his head. He gave his little brother a warm, reassuring smile. Then he turned to the chief steward, who's already carrying away one of the bodies. The man just nervously agreed to his orders. As the chaos settled, someone shouted for everyone to hurry to the infirmary. But Hua Mujin wasn't finished. He grabbed one of the assassins and told him to stop whining about his arm. He tossed the man aside and got straight to the point, asking if he was sent by the Changhua Merchant Guild. His massive sword stood planted in the ground. He told the survivor to answer him properly, and he might let him live. The man was shaking. Hua Mujin warned him not to make him repeat himself, threatening to wipe them all out starting with him. A powerful energy flared around Hua Mujin. The terrified assassin finally broke, confessing that a woman had hired them through a group called the Sarimbang. The man nervously asked if he was really going to be spared. Hua Mujin told him that if he didn't want to die, he had to run back and deliver a message. He ordered the man to go back and tell that woman how Hua Mujin of the Yonghua clan had slaughtered her people, and to let her know he was coming for them next. Back at the clan compound, people in the courtyard started whispering nervously. They saw a trail of blood on the ground and had no idea who was approaching. Then they saw him. It was Hua Mujin, walking right through the middle of them, leaving brutal footprints with every single step. Everyone who saw him, drenched from head to toe, fell silent. No one dared to laugh or look down on him anymore. The whispers started to spread. Word got around that he had just left the second son of the Changhua merchant guild, half paralyzed. People started remembering the old stories, how even Shaolin wanted him as a kid. They weren't calling him the mad young master anymore. Now, he was the hidden dragon of the Jichang. Hua Mujin didn't seem to notice any of it. He just walked straight to a door and pushed it open. He stepped inside without a second thought. The moment he entered, a young man came running, shouting for the young master. The attendant rushed over, frantically asking if he was hurt. Hua Mujin just pushed his face away without a word. The man reported that not a single person had escaped injury. Hua Mujin didn't even seem to hear him. He just kept walking. Later that night, the compound was finally quiet. Hua Mujin was in a bath, the hot water turning red around him. He let out a long breath, the steam rising from the water. But even as he sat there, his mind was on his little brother and sister. He knew that for children of a martial clan, seeing this kind of violence was supposed to be normal, but he didn't want that for them. He decided he would protect them from the cruelty of the world for as long as he possibly could. He looked down at his hands, wondering why he felt so strongly about these kids. Was he just seeing someone else in them? In his mind, he saw a memory of a man with 2 children, a family he had failed to protect in his past life. The memory hardened his resolve. He wouldn't make the same mistake twice. He clenched his fist, and the vision dissolved like water. This time, he would protect his family. He looked out at the moon, a small, confident smile on his face. The next day, an attendant was running through the courtyard in a panic. He couldn't believe the request he'd just received for something called the Red Flame Art Manual. Hua Mujin was sitting calmly with another clan member. He asked the attendant why he was so startled, pretending not to know if he'd asked for something he shouldn't have. The man just stared back, completely thrown off by the young master's strange question. Hua Mujin cut straight to the point. He asked if the man was worried he'd have another fit and tear the precious manual apart. The young master's gaze was sharp and unwavering. The older man couldn't meet his eyes. He knew he couldn't refuse the request. He finally placed the Red Flame Art Manual on the table. With the manual secured, Hua Mujin turned to leave. The 2 men bowed deeply, nervously telling him to rest well. Once he was gone, the older man told the other not to worry. He reminded him that it was thanks to the young master's overwhelming power that they were able to get treated and recover so quickly. The elder noted that the young master's fits had finally stopped, and he was clearly getting better. The other man was still trying to figure it out. He wondered if the treatment had somehow made Hua Mujin a better fighter. They were both recovering in the clan's infirmary. He clenched his fist, suddenly sure of the answer. Hua Mujin must have met a powerful martial arts master in secret. There was no other way to explain it. He looked up, feeling relieved. It seemed like the dark cloud hanging over their clan was finally starting to go away. The next day, Hua Mujin began training his younger siblings. He started by talking about the butterfly dance and the bee buzz, but the little boy didn't understand what he meant. He explained that the goal was to face your opponent and make them feel like their feet were frozen in place, while you could move around them as freely as a butterfly. He proudly claimed it was a basic movement technique he had created himself, based on countless real fights. The 2 kids just stared at him, completely unimpressed, but the little boy was confused. He pointed out that Elder Joe had told them Hua Mujin barely had any real combat experience. Hua Mujin ignored the question and simply told both of them to come at him at the same time. His little sister cheered, ready to go. With a determined shout, they both charged forward. They rushed at him with everything they had. The boy threw a kick while the girl swung a punch. Hua Mujin's eyes widened. He was stunned. This wasn't martial arts. It was just pathetic flailing. He couldn't believe these kids were from a martial family. It was absurd. They didn't know how to balance their weight or generate power from their legs. They couldn't even manage the basics of body control. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore. He shouted at them to stop. The 2 kids froze, surprised by his sudden outburst. He couldn't hide his frustration anymore. Hua Mujin put a hand to his head, telling the kids he suddenly had a headache and that training was over for the day. The sun began to set over the mountains. He just walked off, leaving the 2 of them standing there, completely confused. Once he was out of sight, he let out a long, heavy sigh, but then his expression softened. He thought about the boy whose body this used to be, and how hard things must have been for him. He felt sorry that the clan's martial legacy was broken, but he made a silent promise to restore the ruined clan to its former glory and bring back its legacy. And on top of that, he vowed to find the one who cursed him with the swordless mark, the only enemy he couldn't defeat in his previous life. With his goals clear, he reached for his sword, It was time to begin. He had one goal in mind: find the one who cursed him and end him no matter what. His focus was absolute. He began to practice. This new body was so weak, he could barely lift the giant sword with one hand, but his senses were still sharp. He could feel the energy in the air around him. He went through the sword forms again and again, pushing his body to its limits. He moved through the air, his blade cutting through the evening sky. When his training was done, he headed back. Two of the clan members saw him approach. Hua Mujin announced that he had returned. One of the men looked at him and acknowledged all the hard work he'd put in. One of the men completely lost it. He started yelling, asking if good work was all Hua Mujin had to say after everything they'd gone through. He demanded to know who told him to pull a stunt like that in the first place. Hua Mujin didn't even flinch. He just calmly pointed out that if he had arrived a moment later, they all would have come back in coffins. The other men just looked down, ashamed. They knew he was right. Just then, another person arrived. An old man with a staff. He called out to Hua Mujin, questioning him. He reminded Hua Mujin that he was the only one supposed to be treating the young master. The clan member's jaw dropped. He recognized the old man. It was the famous Taoist, Du Young-su. The Taoist glared at Hua Mujin, telling him he was a beggar and ordering him to get lost. The clan member quickly tried to intervene, bowing and apologizing to the Taoist. He explained that the young master wasn't fully recovered yet. Hua Mujin didn't care. He just told them to move and shoved right past them, sending the old Taoist stumbling back in surprise. A smirk spread across Hua Mujin's face. He wasn't intimidated at all. He turned back to the Taoist, his eyes glowing with a dangerous red light. He politely invited the man inside, saying he must be hungry after his long journey. One of the clan members explained that the Taoist was supposedly from the true lineage of the Wudong sect. He was famous for his miraculous healing arts, and the chief steward had paid a fortune to bring him here. Hua Mujin just smirked. So this was the man they had spent so much money on. He led the old Taoist into the building without another word. He stopped at a room and peered through the crack in the door. Then he slid the door open and walked in. The two men inside, including the chief steward, looked up in surprise. They exchanged a confused look, clearly not expecting him, but the chief steward's expression quickly changed to a small, knowing smile. That's when the Taoist, who had followed Hua Mujin in, slammed his staff hard onto the floor. Hua Mujin leaned in close, a terrifying grin on his face. The old Taoist was sweating, completely frozen in fear. The Taoist stammered, asking what Hua Mujin was saying. He couldn't believe he was being doubted after claiming to be the one who healed him. Before the man could finish, Hua Mujin cut him off. He told him to keep talking, sarcastically promising he'd try his best to believe him. Then, without any warning, he swung his massive sword. He told the man that if he was really from the Wudong sect, dodging this should be easy. The old man screamed, convinced he was about to be split in two. The blade slammed into the ground, cracking the tiles just inches from the Taoist's head. The others yelled for Hua Mujin to stop, asking why he was doing this. Hua Mujin just smirked and told the confused man that he was about to show him something funny. He stood over the terrified Taoist, holding a bowl of water. The old man could only groan, not knowing what was coming next. The old man started shouting, demanding to know if this was how the Flame Hua clan repaid their savior. But Hua Mujin didn't even blink. In one quick motion, he reached out and grabbed the man's beard. The two clan members just stared, completely stunned by what they were seeing. The Taoist froze in horror. His fake beard had been ripped right off his face. A smirk spread across Hua Mujin's face as he commented on how carefully the man had glued it on. He dragged the man and his followers inside the main hall. Inside, the chief steward was furious. He couldn't believe he'd actually fallen for such an obvious scam. One of the clan members looked at the captured man, then turned to Hua Mujin. He asked what the punishment would be. A terrifying smile spread across Hua Mujin's face, his eyes glowing red. He suggested a horrifying punishment, something that would leave the man completely broken. But then Hua Mujin's expression changed. He calmly explained that he wouldn't take his life, because a dead man can't pay back a debt. The scammer immediately started begging, pleading for him to spare his arms and legs. The man was desperate, promising to pay back any amount of money Hua Mujin asked for. Hua Mujin turned away from the begging man and called out to the chief steward. He asked exactly how much money they had lost. When he heard the answer was 50, he couldn't hide his disappointment. He muttered about how foolish the chief steward had been to fall for such an obvious trick. The chief steward could only cover his face in shame. He had no excuse. The scammer and his men stayed flat on the floor, not daring to move a muscle. With the matter settled, Hua Mujin turned and walked away, leaving the chief steward kneeling on the floor. One of the other clan members stepped forward, stopping anyone from following. He yelled at them not to bother, saying their weak bodies would only get in the way. He ordered them to just stay home and not cause any more trouble. Hua Mujin ordered the scammer to get moving and lead the way. The terrified man quickly agreed and scurried ahead. The bearded man put a hand on the chief steward's shoulder. He told him that for now, they just had to trust their young master. As Hua Mujin walked, his entire presence shifted. He was no longer the weak young master, but the powerful man he used to be. The scammer led him through the town, with Hua Mujin following close behind. Finally, they arrived at a large building. This had to be the place. Hua Mujin was getting annoyed. He thought to himself that he should have brought a horse, wondering why there wasn't a single animal for transport in the whole place. Just then, the chief steward walked up and started to explain how he'd gotten there. Hua Mujin's expression made it clear he wasn't in the mood for a long story. That's when the steward revealed a huge, impressive carriage pulled by 4 horses. Hua Mujin was genuinely surprised. He didn't waste any time and stepped right up into the carriage. He paused for a moment, a small, satisfied look on his face. Inside, the carriage was just as impressive. It was clearly built for comfort on long trips. The chief steward explained that since he travels a lot, he had it lined with cotton and leather for comfort. Hua Mujin just smirked, commenting that for a crook, the man sure had a strong work ethic. The chief steward bowed deeply, promising to do as he was told from now on. With things settled, Hua Mujin laid down to rest. He told the steward to wake him up when they got there. He closed his eyes, completely relaxed for the trip ahead. But the chief steward was wide awake, his face twisted with hate, as he silently swore he'd make Hua Mujin pay. He glared out the window, his anger building with every mile. The carriage began its long journey, climbing a winding road into the misty mountains. They traveled for hours, moving deeper into the quiet, fog-covered landscape. The horses pulled on, taking them further and further away from everything they knew. Suddenly, the carriage screeched to a halt. The chief steward stepped out, wondering what was going on. Up ahead, a huge man was standing in the middle of the road, blocking their path. The steward looked up at the imposing figure, his hand trembling slightly. The man glared down at him, his face twisted in anger. That's when the Taoist stepped out of the carriage. He demanded to know why anyone would dare get in the way of his important business. The large man moved in an instant, grabbing the Taoist by his clothes. He snarled that this was the price for his stupid interference. He slammed the Taoist against the carriage, warning him not to hold a grudge. His fist began to glow, ready to deliver the final blow. The Taoist's eyes went wide. He was expecting a fist, but something else happened. Just as the punch was about to land, a hand shot out and stopped it cold. The attacker froze, completely stunned. Turns out, it was Hua Mujin. He was still sitting inside the carriage, holding the giant's arm without even breaking a sweat. He tightened his grip, and the attacker's arm started to bend. With a single, effortless move, Hua Mujin sent the huge man flying. The man hit the ground hard, completely taken out. The Taoist just stared, his mouth wide open. But the fight wasn't over. The attacker looked up, a dark energy gathering in his hands. He seemed to recognize Hua Mujin's power, calling him Shichang's hidden dragon. Hua Mujin calmly stepped out of the carriage, ready to face him. The Taoist could only watch, completely lost. Hua Mujin calmly stepped out of the carriage. A powerful red energy flared to life around him. He looked at the attacker with a confident smirk, eager to see what he was really capable of. The attacker roared, calling for everyone to come out. Just like that, 3 more men stepped out from the trees. It was an ambush. They were all armed. One drew a sword, another grabbed a giant axe, and the last one held a heavy spiked club. Turns out, this was a well-known group, Zhongshan's 4 demons. A dark red energy flared around all of them. Hua Mujin recognized their power instantly. It was demonic energy, but he didn't look worried at all. He calmly placed his hand on the hilt of his sword, ready to fight. The 4 demons hesitated, clearly shocked by the immense power coming from this one man. Hua Mujin just smiled. He was curious to see what they were really capable of. Hua Mujin didn't waste a second. He moved so fast, the demon barely had time to react. He slammed his hand into the man's chest, sending him crashing to the ground. The other demons just stared, completely stunned. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. But Hua Mujin wasn't finished. He immediately launched himself at the next one. The other 2 realized he was picking them off one by one. They yelled that they had to go help their friend. The demon with the club looked up in horror. He screamed that Hua Mujin was coming down on him like a mace. Hua Mujin grinned, putting all his weight and power into the attack. The demon could feel the immense pressure bearing down on him. He brought his foot down hard, and the second demon collapsed. The third demon swung his weapon down with all his might, but Hua Mujin just raised his arm and stopped it cold. The attacker grunted, shocked by his strength. Hua Mujin looked down at him, completely unimpressed. He realized these guys weren't anything special after all. He followed up with a punch that landed with crushing force. With 2 of them down, the last 2 demons charged him at the same time. One of them threw a heavy punch, trying to take him down, but Hua Mujin was faster. He ducked under the blow and slammed his fist right into the man's chest. The last 2 were getting desperate, swinging their weapons wildly, but Hua Mujin easily blocked every single attack. He saw his opening and landed one last solid hit. The blow was so powerful, it shook the ground. He didn't stop, spinning through the air to press his attack on the last 2. One of them managed to get his sword up just in time, but the force of the impact was staggering. His blade couldn't handle the pressure and began to crack. A moment later, it snapped completely, leaving the demon defenseless. The man could only stare, realizing just how outmatched he was. Hua Mujin didn't waste the opening, slamming his fist straight into the man's chest. The demon flew backwards and hit the ground hard, completely taken out. The last of the attackers struggled to get up, but he was finished. Hua Mujin watched him, realizing they were using demonic arts. He found it strange to see those techniques so far out in the Central Plains. His hand rested on his sword. He didn't want to have to take out a group of juniors, even if they used forbidden arts. He wasn't sure what to do. But just as he was about to make a decision, one of the men suddenly shouted for him to wait. The leader of the group dropped to his knees, pressing his forehead to the dirt. He looked up, admitting they had lost. He begged Hua Mujin to spare them. Watching from the side, the chief steward was in complete shock. He couldn't believe that the infamous Zhongshan 4 demons had been defeated so easily. Hua Mujin stood over the kneeling man, his sword resting on his shoulder. The fight was over, and now he held their lives knives in his hands. Hua Mujin looked down at them with a cold smile. He was clearly enjoying their fear. The leader of the group glared back, not ready to give up completely. He shouted that they were only following the orders they were given. But Hua Mujin had no sympathy, telling the man to stop his whining. The leader was confused, asking what he meant. Hua Mujin's patience was gone. He demanded to know who their master was. He pressed harder, asking who taught them the demonic arts. The man stammered, explaining that their teacher had disappeared a year ago, and they never even knew his name. That answer seemed to bother Hua Mujin. A fiery energy started to rise around him as he thought about it. Hua Mujin thought about their story. Something about a teacher just disappearing didn't sit right with him. The man on the ground frantically denied being a thief. He insisted they were just helping out with his brother's business. The Taoist just watched, completely stunned by everything that was happening. In an instant, all the men were on the ground, kneeling in a circle as a sign of surrender. But Hua Mujin wasn't done. He demanded they pay him for his lost energy and for the mental damage they caused. The Taoist couldn't believe what he was hearing. With the situation handled, the carriage continued on its way, leaving the defeated man alone on the road. He stood there for a long time, thinking about the young man who had so easily taken him down. He remembered something his master once told him. If you ever meet someone who is both strong and righteous. Turns out, the man he'd beaten wasn't alone. He had 3 brothers, and together they were known as the Zhonghayan 4 Demons. Just then, the carriage came to another sudden stop. Inside, Hua Mujin was already getting annoyed, wondering why they were stopping again. He got up, his patience wearing thin as he went to see what was going on. But when he stepped outside, he saw all 4 of the demons kneeling on the ground. They were calling him their boss. They begged him to accept them, pledging their loyalty to the Flame Hua clan and promising to serve him until they died. Hua Mujin just looked down at them with disgust. He asked if they'd gone crazy from getting beaten up so badly, and who exactly they thought they were calling boss. The men looked up, completely stunned by his cold response. That's when they felt it. A powerful energy flared up around Hua Mujin, and his eyes seemed to glow. The men were frozen, unable to believe what they were seeing. Time later, the carriage continued on its journey through the night. Suddenly, the horses cried out, and the whole thing lurched to a halt. The jolt woke Hua Mujin, who was already looking annoyed. Turns out, he had company. The 4 demons were now crammed inside the carriage with him. He was asking one of the brothers a question. The man admitted he'd never heard of anything like it, but quickly decided to just drop the subject. The Taoist just sat quietly, listening to the whole thing. Hua Mujin laid out his problem. He couldn't wrap his head around how demonic arts users could become warriors for a proper clan. To him, it just didn't make any sense. The eldest, a 21-year-old named Chiol Muk, listened beside the 4th brother, 18-year-old No Sak. They were officially part of the Flame Hua clan now. The other 2 brothers were introduced as well. Dongjok was the 2nd brother, 20 years old, and Zhang Te was the 3rd, 19. Hua Mujin looked at them with a strange smile. He said their reckless charge reminded him of someone he used to know, a guy he was actually fond of. The 4 of them listened to his every word, completely focused. He demanded to know if they understood him. Finally, he just sighed and gave in. He told them to do as they pleased. From that moment on, they were officially warriors of the Flame Hua clan. He then gave them one more rule. They were to stop calling him boss and address him as young master instead. The carriage continued its journey under the moonlight. Sometime later, they finally arrived at a large, walled estate. The gates opened, and the carriage rolled right through into the main courtyard. The carriage finally rolled to a stop. Hua Mujin looked out at the massive estate. He dryly commented on how fancy it was, asking the Taoist if this was his home. The Taoist nervously confirmed it was his house and invited them inside. He quickly ordered someone to open the gate. An older servant rushed out, confused about who had arrived. The Taoist quickly shut him down, telling him not to ask questions and to prepare food in the annex building right away. The servant bowed and nervously led Hua Mujin and the 4 brothers into the main courtyard. The brothers looked around, clearly wondering what was going on. Hua Mujin looked down at the Taoist with pure contempt. He remarked that this was how the man had been living so well, using the money he cheated out of people. Sensing the sudden change in the air, one of the brothers stepped forward. He quietly asked the eldest what was wrong. Suddenly, a man named Bi Sojin appeared, demanding to know what was going on. The Taoist tried to send him away, insisting it was nothing, but Bi Sojin pushed past him, demanding to know who these people were. He looked straight at Hua Mujin and his men. He called the Taoist a swindler and told his guests they shouldn't get involved in household matters. Hua Mujin's eyes narrowed. He was not going to let that slide. In a flash, he grabbed the Taoist by the collar, but he was looking right at Bi Sojin, telling him he had a foul mouth. One of the brothers immediately stepped up, asking Hua Mujin if he should deal with the man. The Taoist panicked, screaming that it was all a misunderstanding and that they were his guests. In his desperation, he announced Hua Mujin's identity to everyone. He was the first young master of the Hua clan, but Bi Sojin just smirked. He seemed amused that a noble from an orthodox sect was running around with lowlifes and civilians. But Bi Sojin just smirked, telling Hua Mujin that they were busy. He didn't seem to notice the 4 massive men standing right behind Hua Mujin, all of them looking furious. The Taoist started to panic, realizing things were about to get out of hand. That's when Bisojin drew his sword. He couldn't believe he was about to lose to a bunch of scum. The Taoist's eyes went wide. He couldn't believe what was happening. But Bisojin's words were a mistake. One of the brothers had heard enough. He stepped forward, his eyes locked on Bisojin. He asked Hua Mujin for permission to crush the man's jaw. The air grew heavy. Everyone waited to see what Hua Mujin would do next. Before anyone could move, Hua Mujin shot into the air. He landed right in the middle of the courtyard, separating the two groups. With a chilling smile, he looked at the angry brother and beckoned him forward, calling him a dog. The man's face twisted with fury. He was done talking. He lunged forward, and their weapons met with a sharp crack. The brother attacked again and again, but Hua Mujin deflected every single blow with ease. Hua Mujin calmly pointed out that while his opponent's style was fast, it had no real power. The man froze, completely stunned by the comment. To prove his point, Hua Mujin didn't even draw his sword. He just used his scabbard to stop the attack cold. With a powerful swing of his scabbard, Hua Mujin sent the man's sword flying. The brother could only watch in shock as his weapon was knocked away. The other brothers watched from the side, knowing it was already over. One of them admitted that once Hua Mujin pushes you back, there's no way to recover. He knew exactly what that meant for his brother. An old man watching from nearby couldn't believe what he was seeing. That's when Hua Mujin finally drew his blade. He slammed it into the ground, right next to the man's head, shattering the stone tiles. A cold smile spread across his face, his eyes glowing red. The fight was over. He didn't even need a second look. Suddenly, a huge explosion blew a hole right through the wall of the clan's main building. A group of men stood outside, looking at the damage. The one in charge didn't seem surprised at all. Hua Mujin walked out into the courtyard alone. He stared down the man responsible for the attack. The attacker stood over him, holding a spear. He mocked Hua Mujin, asking if his dead grandfather was crying in his grave. His eyes glowed with a red light as he made a threat. He promised to make Hua Mujin scream so loud his grandfather would hear it from the afterlife. Hua Mujin looked up from the ground, seemingly terrified. He stammered, pleading with the man to wait. Even the attacker's own men looked worried. They could tell this was going too far, but it was a trick. Hua Mujin's eyes blazed with fury. He told the man to back down right now, or he'd snap his bones. The attacker just laughed. His mocking voice echoed over the entire compound. Then, there was a sickening cracking sound. Watching from the side, a group of men realized what was happening. One of them muttered that the attacker was done for. The old man leading them gasped, his eyes wide with shock. He rushed forward, getting between Hua Mujin and the fallen man. He pleaded for him to stop, offering to pay for the man's life. The attacker was on the ground, twitching in pain. The old man fell to his knees, begging Hua Mujin to spare him, promising he would pay any price. He was completely terrified, but Hua Mujin just grinned. He told the old man he should have offered to pay from the start. The men watching from the side couldn't believe it, thinking he was a complete madman. With the fight settled, they moved inside. Inside, Hua Mujin looked over the room filled with people and supplies. He commented that they seemed to have gathered quite a lot. With a confident smile, he announced it was time to start calculating. Hua Mujin started laying out the costs. He put a price on everything. 200 gold ingots for the man's limbs and another 300 for his life. The old man was confused. He thought Hua Mujin was going to take them in, not rob them blind. The old man was sweating. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Hua Mujin smiled. He told them to just hand over everything they had to keep things simple. Then he asked if anyone had a problem with that. The old man was furious. He realized Hua Mujin was worse than any bandit he'd ever met. With no other choice, the men started bringing out all their valuables. Hua Mujin gave a simple order to his man, leave nothing behind. The subordinate quickly agreed. Just as they were finishing up, Hua Mujin paused. He sensed something. He turned his head, staring into the dark hallway. Something wasn't right. His eyes narrowed, focusing on whatever he had sensed in the dark. His gaze landed on an old folding screen. It was giving off a strange energy. The old man standing nearby stiffened. Hua Mujin turned to him, a questioning look on his face. He asked the old man if the screen was anything special, but the man quickly said it wasn't. Hua Mujin smiled and told the old man he could take it, saying his own room felt a bit empty. The old man was stunned, but gratefully accepted the offer. Meanwhile, all the treasure they had collected was being loaded onto a large cart. Once everything was packed, Hua Mujin gave the signal to his men. With a huge grin, he yelled for everyone to move out. The heavy wheels of the cart began to turn. As they pulled away, the defeated men could only watch from the ground. The old man waved goodbye, grateful for the gift he'd been given. One of the men reached out as the cart disappeared. He couldn't believe what had just happened, cursing Hua Mujin and wondering if he was even human. Even the old man was terrified. He wondered what he'd done to deserve meeting such a complete lunatic. Sometime later, back at the Hua clan estate, things were quiet. One of the clan members was walking through the courtyard when he suddenly froze, his eyes wide with shock. He was staring at a huge chest, overflowing with gold, and it wasn't just one. Hua Mujin's men were carrying box after box of treasure into the compound. The young man couldn't understand what had happened. The young clan member was horrified. He stammered, asking Hua Mujin if he had to take lives to get all that gold. Hua Mujin just scoffed, not even bothering to answer. Sometime later, Hua Mujin was sitting with his subordinate, Ma Sok. He casually asked Ma Sok how old he thought some nearby people were. The blonde man walked nervously beside Hua Mujin, who had a strange, unsettling grin on his face. The clan member suddenly remembered something urgent. He told Hua Mujin that very important guests had arrived and were waiting for him in the reception hall. Seeing Hua Mujin's expression, the young man panicked. He begged him not to cause any trouble with these guests and to hurry. A moment later, Hua Mujin walked into the reception hall. His arrival was announced to everyone inside. The guests, two older men, turned to look. They seemed surprised to see him. One of Hua Mujin's men began the introductions. He explained that these were the three merchant group leaders who had supported their clan. The first was Pung Quan-o, leader of the Pungyang merchant group. Next to him were Dong Guan-yeo of the Muryang merchant union and the leader of Golden Finance. They all sat there silently, watching Hua Mujin with calculating eyes. Hua Mujin stepped forward with a calm smile. He introduced himself and thanked them for coming. The man who let him in looked completely shocked. This wasn't the weak young master he was used to. One of the merchant leaders finally stood up, gesturing around the room as if he owned it. The three of them looked completely at ease. They were the ones with all the power here, and they knew it. For a moment, the room was completely silent. Hua Mujin cut straight to the point. He asked if they were here to collect the debts his clan owed them. The three men were stunned into silence. The leader of the Pungyang merchant group, Peng Quan-o, finally spoke. He said he was glad Hua Mujin was ready to talk about repayment. Hua Mujin thanked them for their support over the years, but he made it clear that repayment would be handled properly, on his terms. Then, he asked for the exact total the Flame Hua clan owed their groups. The merchants looked at each other, completely thrown off by his confidence. One of the other leaders had to admit it. Hua Mujin was right. That's exactly why they were here. The leader of Golden Finance spoke up, starting the list. His group was owed 3,200 niang. Hua Mujin listened, a small smile playing on his lips. He wasn't worried at all. The other two leaders watched him, their confidence completely gone. They had no idea what he was planning. The leader of Golden Finance continued, adding that the Changhua merchant group was also involved. The other merchants were stunned to hear the name. Hua Mujin listened silently, his eyes sharp and focused. The merchant leader looked nervous, but he confirmed that what Hua Mujin suspected was correct. He explained that after the duel, the Changhua merchant group started using its massive wealth to pressure them. They took over all the trading goods and cut off any other groups that worked with them. It got even worse. The Changhua group shamelessly stole their branch managers. The other leaders couldn't believe what they were hearing. The leader admitted that while he was ashamed to say it, they just didn't have the strength to fight back anymore. Hua Mujin took it all in. He now understood the entire picture. He looked at them and said that hearing everything they had to endure weighed heavily on his heart. He told them that all the people who clung to their clan when times were good had left. Only Elder Zhou and Chief Do remained. He then looked at the three merchant leaders, saying they also stayed behind to protect the clan. Then he slammed his hand down on the table. With a confident look, he declared that he would repay everything. The merchant leaders were stunned. One of them couldn't believe it, asking if that was even possible. But Hua Mujin wasn't just talking about paying back money. He promised to free their groups from the powerful Changhua merchant group entirely. The three merchant leaders were completely speechless. They just stared, unable to believe what they were hearing. One of them couldn't even close his mouth, but one of the clan elders just smiled. He seemed to know exactly what his young master was capable of. Finally, one of the merchants found his voice. He stammered, asking if young Master Mujin was really willing to use force to help them. Another one of the leaders looked terrified. He quickly tried to warn Mujin about the danger he was walking into. He explained that the Changhua merchant group wasn't acting alone. They were backed by the Kongdong sect, one of the strongest and most feared groups in the entire Murim. Hua Mujin didn't even flinch. He just casually asked if those old guys were the ones backing them, completely unimpressed. The merchants were stunned by his confidence. After a long silence, one of them finally spoke, his hands clasped together respectfully. He explained that if they simply got rid of the debt, the Changhua group wouldn't have any power over them anymore. Hua Mujin just took a calm sip of his tea. He wasn't worried at all. He thanked the men for their words, saying their conversation had put his mind at ease. He even let out a small laugh. With the meeting over, the merchant leaders took their leave. They wished the Hua clan prosperity for the future. As they walked away, they couldn't help but think about the challenge ahead. The Changhua merchant group was no small enemy. But as soon as the merchants were gone, the elder turned to Hua Mujin, his face filled with worry. He called out his name in disbelief. He frantically asked if the young master was actually serious about what he'd just promised. Hua Mujin just looked annoyed, tired of all the nagging. Hua Mujin reminded them of what the Changhua group did to the merchants. He warned that if they just let it go, their clan would be the next target. The next morning, Hua Mujin was already on the move. He had a plan, and he was sure it would work. He knew it was time to see if his preparations would pay off. A man approached and reported to Hua Mujin. He confirmed that all the tasks he'd been given were now complete. Hua Mujin told the newcomers to greet the clan's elder and the chief steward. The two of them looked completely surprised by who was standing in front of them. Hua Mujin then made the introduction. He announced that starting today, new warriors would be joining their clan, the famous young men of Zhongshan, but they were better known by another name, Zhongshan's Four Demons. The four powerful warriors bowed their heads, asking to be welcomed. The elder and Chief Do were speechless. They just stared, completely stunned by the announcement. Hua Mujin just smiled. He then pointed out that the two of them were actually younger than he was. This only made the elder and Chief Do more confused. They stammered, unable to understand what he was talking about. The elder finally shouted that it was impossible. The new warriors, however, didn't seem to care. One of them complained that he was starving, while another wondered why the old men were so shocked. The elder finally found his voice and demanded to know why Hua Mujin would bring these men into the clan without asking for permission first. Hua Mujin just listened silently. Hua Mujin calmly turned the question back on them. He asked if they had consulted him before they tried to sneak his younger siblings out of the clan. The two men froze, a cold sweat breaking out on their faces. He made his position clear. If he approved of them, they would stay. If he didn't, they would be kicked out. His word was final. Chief Do stammered, completely caught. He had no answer for Hua Mujin's accusation. Hua Mujin's expression was serious. He reminded them that the clan had just spent over 10,000 gold to repay its debts. Without another word, he led them somewhere else entirely. The two men looked around, completely confused by the sudden move. Chief Do stared in disbelief at what was in front of them. Hua Mujin explained that the scammer they dealt with had a lot more money hidden away than anyone knew. The old man was still trying to process it all. Hua Mujin, on the other hand, was completely unfazed. Chief Do leaned in for a closer look, examining the items carefully. Hua Mujin then pointed to an ornate folding screen. He mentioned it was a piece from Zhang Sosen that was given to him, and Chief Do shouted the name in shock. Hua Mujin added that he took it because even a cheap sale would bring in a lot of money. After a moment of inspection, Chief Do had to agree. It looked real. Hua Mujin then asked a simple question. Was this enough to buy meat for everyone? His expression was serious. He had a plan. Later, he kicked open the door to the storage room. He carefully placed the valuable folding screen inside, securing the clan's new treasure. The next morning came quickly. Hua Mujin had gathered all the clan members in the courtyard. Each one was carrying a heavy pack on their back. The younger members looked especially confused. Hua Mujin's voice cut through the silence, saying he knew they were all wondering why he called them out at dawn. Even Chief Do stood among the crowd, waiting to hear what the young master had planned for them all. He explained a simple truth. No matter how great a martial art is, it's useless if the body is weak. Hua Mujin stood before them, arms crossed, ready to begin. His expression made it clear this wasn't going to be easy. He told them he hoped there would be no dropouts as they followed him. The clan members looked at each other, stunned. He then pointed to a large, straw-wrapped bundle on the ground. He announced that from now on, this would be their loyal training partner. He stood before a huge pile of the bundles and gave a final, chilling warning. He made it clear that this was not food, and if he caught anyone eating it, they were finished. One of the members stared down at the heavy-looking pack. Even the kids were there. The little boy looked at it and guessed it was probably 15 kilograms at most. One of the older members stared at the bundle, completely confused. He nervously asked what they were even supposed to do with it. Hua Mujin just smiled. He knew exactly what was coming. The man laughed, trying to explain that the bundle was so heavy, it would probably take 2 men just to lift it. The smile vanished from Hua Mujin's face. He ordered them to shut up and pick it up, threatening to beat them senseless if they didn't. His hand rested on his sword as he added a chilling promise. One hit from him would crush every bone in their body. The other men froze, sweat dripping down their faces. The message was received loud and clear. With a loud groan, one of the men finally struggled to lift the massive bundle onto his shoulders. Just then, Hua Mujin took a single, deliberate step forward. The real training was just getting started. He looked down at them, completely unimpressed. He told them that people who practice demonic arts shouldn't be so embarrassing. Then he gave them a choice. If they didn't want to train, they could fight him instead. That threat worked. The bald warrior grit his teeth, choosing the lesser of 2 evils. With a powerful roar, he managed to get the huge bundles onto his shoulders. The other clan members watched, their jaws dropped in disbelief. Soon, everyone was carrying the heavy loads. Hua Mujin yelled that if they just decided they could do it, then it was possible. He told them to throw away any pathetic thoughts of doubt. Questioning themselves wasn't allowed. He screamed that only death awaited failure, so nothing in the world should be impossible. Even his little brother and sister pushed through the pain, straining under the weight. With a wild grin, Hua Mujin announced the next part of the training, 200 repetitions. He screamed for everyone to follow his lead, and so the brutal training began. The entire yard was filled with groans of pain as they started counting out the repetitions. Training was relentless. Everyone's legs were shaking, barely holding up the immense weight. Every muscle was screaming in protest. The weight was almost too much to bear. Hua Mujin was right there with them, yelling for everyone to push harder. He screamed at them to tighten their stomachs, threatening them if they dared to give up. Suddenly, one of the men felt a strange sensation. It was as if his entire body was collapsing from the legs up, but the fear of what Hua Mujin would do to him was even worse than the pain. He knew he couldn't stop. With a desperate roar, he pushed through the feeling, forcing his body to keep going. One of the women watched the kids, who were somehow still pushing through. She thought to herself that it was exhausting just to see it. Hua Mujin's threat was clear. Anyone who complained would be dealt with. So they kept going, their bodies shaking under the impossible weight. The sun began to set, but the training didn't stop. Their bodies were screaming, every muscle pushed far beyond its limit. They were running on nothing but fumes, completely drained of all energy. And then, someone finally couldn't take it anymore. He collapsed to the ground. Hua Mujin looked down at them, completely unimpressed. He scoffed that the whole day was wasted on just a warm-up and questioned how they ever expected to learn martial arts with such pathetic stamina. But then, he announced that the training for the day was over. The moment the words left his mouth, everyone dropped their bundles and collapsed, completely spent. But seeing their relief, Hua Mujin just smiled. He wasn't finished with them yet. He clarified that while the exercises were done, they were not allowed to put the bundles down until he gave the order. Then, Hua Mujin called out to one of the men, Zhang Sogen. He ordered him to tie up anyone who had dropped their rice sacks. Then he gave a final final, chilling warning. Anyone who untied the ropes would have their own life untied as well. Jang Sogen looked defeated. In that moment of pain, he found himself thinking of someone he wished he could see. As Hua Mujin walked away from the training grounds, another man named Ma Sok approached him. Ma Sok asked if he should prepare bathwater for the young master. With the orders given, Hua Mujin headed inside, leaving his men to suffer through the night. Hua Mujin finally made it back to his room and collapsed onto the bed. This new body was still incredibly weak. The day's training had taken a toll on him too. Meanwhile, the rest of the clan members were gathered inside. A huge feast was laid out for them, but there was a catch. They still weren't allowed to take off the rice sacks. Everyone was completely worn out. His little sister could barely even lift her spoon. The men trembled from the effort, their arms shaking as they tried to reach for the food. Their bodies were so tired that even something as simple as using chopsticks felt impossible. Finally, one of the men gave up and just grabbed the food with his bare hands. They were too hungry to care about anything else. The break for food didn't matter. The exhaustion was still setting in deep. One of the men muttered that even their previous master never pushed them this hard. Every muscle in his body was screaming. The next exercise began immediately. Push-ups. With the heavy sacks still on their backs, Hua Mujin was watching every single one of them. He screamed at a man in the third row, asking if he wanted to die. He yelled at them to keep their backs straight, reminding them they still had 120 reps to go. One of the older members couldn't believe it. He wondered how everyone was pushing through this, thinking they were all monsters. As they moved, Hua Mujin mocked their form, yelling that they all looked like ducks. The strange sight drew the attention of others in the clan. They could only watch, confused by the bizarre training. For the men going through it, it was pure hell. Every muscle burned, and their minds were screaming. But the training didn't stop. The next day, it was the same thing all over again. To make things worse, one of the warriors started yelling threats. He told everyone that if they fell behind him, they'd have to carry another sack. The threat was real. Some of them just couldn't keep up and collapsed under the impossible weight. But Hua Mujin was in a different league. While they struggled with one sack, he was carrying 3 without breaking a sweat. He glanced back at them. He was actually a little surprised they were keeping up this well. A small, wicked grin spread across his face. He wasn't thinking about giving them a break. He was thinking about making it even harder. After a long march, they arrived at a new location. The sound of crashing water was deafening. The clan members stared, completely stunned. They couldn't believe where he had brought them. But Hua Mujin just had a wicked grin on his face. This was exactly what he'd planned. They stood at the edge of a massive, raging river. Then came the order. They had to cross it. The current was incredibly fast. Just looking at it was terrifying, and it was all being fed by a giant waterfall crashing down from the cliffs. Even Soyeon seemed excited. She turned to the little brother and joked that the water must feel refreshing. He just stared at her, a cold sweat breaking out. He suddenly remembered something awful. Soyeon couldn't swim. The men panicked. They yelled at Hua Mujin that it was impossible, that the current was just too fast. But Hua Mujin didn't even turn around. He just told them they were going anyway. He gave them a simple choice: cross the river or fight him instead. That's when one of the warriors made his choice. He took a running start and leaped off the cliff. He vanished into the violent water below. The bald warrior, Sheol Muk, knew what he had to do. He told the others their chances were better in the river than against Hua Mujin. With that, he jumped in, and another followed right behind. Soon, the entire group was running for the edge. It was either the river or certain death. They hit the water hard, disappearing into the churning river. But at the edge of the cliff, one of the men froze in fear. The warrior behind him got angry, telling him to either jump or get out of the way. That's when the little brother, Dojin, ran past them. He yelled that he was going first, asking if they really thought Mujin would let them get away with hesitating. He thought to himself that he could never say no to Mujin. His mind was made up. He declared that this wouldn't make him back down. Without another thought, he launched himself off the edge. He hit the water with a massive splash. The men left on the cliff screamed his name, terrified for him. They were all in the river now, fighting against the violent current. They shouted warnings to each other, knowing that one mistake meant they wouldn't make it. The freezing water crashed over Dojin as he fought just to keep his head above the surface. The current was brutal, a violent mess of water pulling them in every direction. Dojin fought just to keep his head above the surface, but the heavy sack on his back felt like an anchor. But even as he struggled, a new determination filled his eyes. He refused to give up. It didn't matter. The weight was just too much, and it dragged him under the waves. He sank deeper and deeper into the dark, cold water. From the shore, Hua Mujin watched as the current grabbed Dojin and started pulling him away. The other men screamed in panic, yelling that Dojin was being carried off by the river. He was completely helpless, screaming as the waves crashed over him again and again. But then, one of the larger warriors started powering through the water, fighting the current with everything he had. He spotted Dojin being pulled away in the distance. He wasn't going to let him go down. With a final push, he reached the boy and grabbed him, yelling that he had him. Dojin gasped for air, coughing up water as the warrior desperately told him to just breathe. He looked at him with intensity, ordering him to grab his arm and hold on tight. The warrior held Dojin tight and told him to get ready. The boy didn't understand what was happening, and then he just threw him. Dojin flew through the air like a rock, straight towards the cliff. From the cliff top, Elder Joe and another man watched the chaos below. They screamed in horror, pointing down at the river as they yelled Dojin's name. He slammed against the rocks, but his hand found a grip. He was out. The warrior climbed out right behind him. He looked down at the exhausted boy and told him he did extremely well. Dojin looked up, completely drained. He stammered out a thank you, grateful to be alive. The warrior warrior just looked back at him, his face still grim. The ordeal wasn't over yet. Just as Dojin was catching his breath, the warrior who saved him suddenly tensed up. Someone else had arrived. It was Hua Mujin. He immediately knelt down and asked if Dojin was hurt. The boy told him he was fine, explaining that a warrior had come to his rescue. The warrior who'd helped him was just stunned. He couldn't figure out how the young master had caught up to them so fast. Dojin just stared up at his brother, his expression completely serious. Mujin looked back at him, taking in the look in his eyes. Then with a fire in his eyes, Dojin declared that this was all so he could finally become a true martial warrior of the Yomhua clan. Hearing that, a small, proud smile appeared on Mujin's face. The warrior who'd pulled him from the water started cheering, praising Dojin for his incredible spirit. The boy just quietly thanked him. Far away, two elders watched the ordeal. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. The next part of their training was to climb a sheer cliff face that disappeared into the clouds. Every handhold was a struggle. The rock was sharp and unforgiving. The warriors pulled themselves up the cliff, each one carrying a heavy sack on their back. Soyeon screamed at them from below, yelling that if they fell, there wouldn't be enough of them left to bury. She told them to climb with everything they had. One of the warriors was already regretting his decision to follow Mujin. Just then, his foot slipped. He screamed in pure terror as he fell. But just before he was lost, a hand shot out and grabbed his arm, stopping his fall. The man below him dug his fingers into the rock, his muscles screaming under the weight of the sack. The warrior above was already begging for his life. The man below just grit his teeth, trying to push through the pain. A voice echoed from far below, screaming at them not to doze off. There was no room for weakness on this mountain. Hours passed. The sun beat down on them without mercy. But the climb wasn't the end of it. Next, they were forced to run through the village, with someone yelling that anyone who fell behind would be dealt with. The people in the village watched them pass. One of them explained that these were the warriors of the Yomhua clan, and it wasn't just the men. Even the youngest members, the little brother and sister, were being put through the same brutal test. She was exhausted, but her eyes showed nothing but pure focus. She wasn't going to be the one to quit. Suddenly, the little sister, Soyeon, collapsed under the weight of her sack. Her brother screamed her name, watching her fall. Hua Mujin heard the shout and stopped, turning to see what the commotion was about. Soyeon was completely exhausted. She looked up at one of the older warriors, Elder Joe, and quietly asked him to carry her. The elder froze. He was completely torn, not knowing what he should do. He couldn't say no. He lifted her onto his shoulders, and she gave a little thumbs up, clearly pleased with herself. But the other warriors weren't happy. They stopped and yelled back, asking what he thought he was doing. That's when Hua Mujin appeared, right behind them. With a terrifying grin, he asked them why they weren't running. The two men froze in absolute terror. They knew they had just made a huge mistake. The two men who had complained were now collapsed on the floor. The others weren't doing much better, barely able to stay on their feet under the immense weight. One of the warriors was clearly about to give out. He was sweating, his body shaking from the effort. He looked up, his face a mask of pure exhaustion. Hua Mujin stood over him, looking down with disappointment. He asked the man how long he planned to keep this up. He was furious at the man's weakness. He told the warrior to just crawl out and quit if he couldn't endure it, and to stop causing trouble for others. When the man didn't answer, he angrily asked if he was even listening. That's when the warrior looked up, his eyes burning with rage. He told Hua Mujin he was going to take him down. He screamed that he had wanted to quit being a warrior a long time ago. Hua Mujin looked down at him, his voice cold. He asked if the man was just afraid of getting beaten for speaking his mind. He told the man he clearly wasn't cut out to be a warrior, and offered to end things for him right now. The warrior stared up in terror, asking why he was doing this. Watching this, one of the other warriors spoke up, telling them to stop. But it wasn't Hua Mujin he was talking to. His fist clenched, shaking with rage. He lunged forward, not at Hua Mujin, but at the man on the floor. He screamed that if he didn't want to live like a warrior, then he shouldn't live at all. Another warrior struggled to his feet, his face set with determination. Hua Mujin just watched, saying nothing. The other men looked on, their expressions turning hard. The weakness of one was making the others stronger. One of the warriors shouted in disgust. He couldn't believe they were supposed to call someone so pathetic a brother. But another warrior reached out a hand to the man on the floor. The bald warrior chimed in, saying that the young master had seen more than any of them. He explained that everyone handles things differently, but the warrior with the braids just scowled, clearly not buying it. He muttered to himself that if a situation like this ever put him in danger again, he wouldn't hesitate to act. Later that night, Hua Mujin was doing the same training. He struggled to get to his feet, the weight of the sack pressing down on him. He started walking, complaining to himself about how ridiculously far away the toilet was. But even with the weight on his back, his eyes were sharp and focused. Suddenly a figure shot out from the trees, moving like a blur. But Hua Mujin just watched him come, completely unfazed. His eyes flashed red. He planted his foot hard into the ground, ready for the impact. With a powerful swing, Mujin met the attack head on. The attacker cried out in disbelief, completely stunned by the young master's hidden strength. The braids came at him with everything he had, his sword a blur of blue energy. He leaped through the air, bringing his blade down in a powerful arc. But as their blades met, the warrior was stunned. Mujin wasn't just fast, he was overwhelmingly strong, yet his movements were perfectly smooth. He couldn't understand how someone so young could wield a sword with such impossible skill. He wondered if this was what people meant when they talked about true martial talent. With a final, powerful step, Mujin planted his foot, and the ground cracked under the force. He looked back, completely calm. The fight was over. The warrior with the braids stood there, now with his own training sack on his back. He just watched the young master, completely humbled. As the warrior walked away, Mujin called out, stopping him in his tracks. He said he was bored anyway, and that this would work out great. He told the man to put the rice sack down and pick up a sword. The warrior didn't hesitate. He let the heavy sack crash to the ground. With a sword now in hand, he faced the young master under the night sky. The warrior looked determined, but a hint of nervousness showed on his face as he agreed. Mujin, on the other hand, was completely calm. He simply told him to come. The warrior exploded forward, closing the distance in a flash. But Mujin met his attack head on, and their blades clashed with incredible force. The force of the impact was huge, sending a shockwave out from where their blades met. The warrior pushed back with everything he had, a look of pure determination on his face. But Mujin didn't even flinch. He just held his ground, completely calm. They broke apart and clashed again in a blur of motion. Suddenly, the warrior's eyes went wide. He knew this wouldn't be easy, but something felt completely off. He couldn't understand what was happening. He moved faster than he thought possible, surprised by his own speed. The training was actually working, but it didn't matter. Mujin easily blocked every single attack. A small smile appeared on Mujin's face. He finally seemed satisfied, remarking that the warrior was at last becoming useful. The warrior swung his blade with everything he had, but Mujin was already above him, his eyes glowing red. He called out that the warrior was too focused on what was right in front of him. The next thing he knew, he was sent flying backward. He dug his hand into the ground, trying to stop himself. Without hesitating, he pushed off the ground and charged right back in. He gritted his teeth. This was just as tough as he thought it would be. Mujin smiled. He told the warrior that his toughness was finally starting to become useful. The warrior thought to himself that the impact was still huge, but it wasn't enough to take him down in one hit anymore. He could keep fighting. The warrior was still on his feet. He and Mujin faced each other in the quiet training yard. The fight paused for a moment. He looked down at his sword, his mind racing. He was starting to understand something about the young master's methods. His mind flashed back to earlier. Mujin had announced a new, strange training exercise for everyone. He told them to lift a heavy rice sack between their legs and just hang on. The training was brutal. The men grunted and strained, trying to hold themselves up with the heavy sacks weighing them down. He remembered the intense burn in his muscles as he fought to keep his grip, but through the pain, he could feel his body getting stronger. Two other warriors watched from the side. They noticed that despite how hard it was, everyone seemed more determined than ever. The training didn't stop there. They ran through the streets, pushing their bodies to the absolute limit. The warrior's legs were shaking. He was using every last bit of his strength just to stay standing. He told himself he couldn't collapse again. Not here. So he pushed forward, one step at a time. And he wasn't alone. Every single warrior was pushing through the same pain. While Mujin watched them, a small smile on his face. This was exactly what he wanted to see. Then, Mujin's voice cut through the air. He told them they had all held out well, and that the special training was officially over. He ordered them to undo the ropes and set the sacks down. As one, the warriors finally lifted the heavy burdens from their shoulders. With a smirk, he told them he was sorry to rain on their parade, but he wasn't finished. The warriors' faces dropped. It wasn't over. He pointed over to the training grounds. Even his younger siblings stood there with their sacks, watching him intently. He told them that while the physical training was over, they should never forget that a strong body becomes a strong sword. The entire group stood there, exhausted, but hanging on his every word. With that, he gripped the handle of his sword. He announced that he would now lead them in practical sparring to take their experience to a whole new level. Mujin laid out the rules for the next phase. When he called a warrior's name, they were to grab a weapon and step forward. The training had been absolutely brutal. It was a never-ending cycle of pain and endurance that felt like it would never stop. But all that hardship was starting to pay off. Real experience was bringing real change. Turns out, the infamous bandits known as Zhongshan's 4 demons were now the new martial arts instructors of the Flame Hua clan. And just like that, the Flame Hua clan began to change. It was happening quietly, but very quickly. They were starting to regain the glory they once had, and the same power that had made their name famous long ago. Even Mujin's little brother was inspired, throwing himself into his own training with everything he had. He practiced with one of the warriors, who praised his good form. The future of the clan was already looking brighter. One of the new instructors was coaching Mujin's little brother, giving him tips on how to put more power into his strikes. The other instructors watched from the side, impressed. They could see the boy was getting his spirit back. The kid was putting everything he had into it, sweating but still smiling. The instructor watched him, a proud smile on his face. His thoughts then turned to Mujin. He looked over at the storage building, wondering if the young master would even come out today. The building was completely silent, bathed in the light of the setting sun. But inside, it was a different story. Mujin sat in the center of the room, and a powerful blue energy was swirling all around him. He was completely focused, channeling a power far beyond anything the others could imagine. Mujin had lost all track of time. He realized it had already been 4 days since he started. He understood this wasn't just some ordinary folding screen. The more power he poured into it, the stronger it pushed back against him. He accepted the challenge. It was time to see which one of them would break first. Suddenly, the screen itself began to glow with a strange, powerful energy. Mujin pushed back with everything he had, his own energy flaring up to meet the challenge. His eyes glowed red. He was done playing games. And then, there was a huge flash of light as the two forces slammed into each other. The blast was so strong, it sent him flying across the room. He yelled out as he crashed against the far wall. But in that moment of impact, he finally understood. understood. He walked back to the screen and pressed a small, hidden spot on the wood. The wild energy around the screen faded instantly. A secret compartment opened, and a small, glowing green bottle fell out. This was what the screen had been protecting all along. He stared at the spilled liquid, wondering what it could possibly be. He picked it up, but the smell was so bad, he had to cover his nose. But as he looked closer, he realized there was more to this than just a bad smell. Turns out, the bottle wasn't the only thing hidden inside. There was also a book. He picked it up and read the title. It was a manual for something called the Mind-Severing Sword Art. A grin spread across his face. He couldn't wait to see what secrets it held. He spent the entire night reading, completely losing track of time until the sun came up. But after all that, he was just disappointed. He admitted to himself that he'd gotten his hopes up for nothing. He let out a sigh, but it wasn't one of disappointment anymore. A new idea was forming in his mind. He realized that while the technique wasn't right for him, its cultivation method was perfect for the Manhwa clan. This explained everything. He finally understood why he couldn't properly teach the clan's warriors. Their basic cultivation methods were just too different. The two energies were like fire and water. Trying to mix them without knowing what you were doing would only end in disaster. He realized it was actually lucky that his body's energy core had been destroyed. Starting from nothing meant he could build his own power without any problems. He smiled, his mind made up. He decided that from now on, this would become the new sword art of the Manhwa clan. He handed the manual to one of the clan's instructors. The man's eyes went wide as he realized what he was holding. The other instructors gathered around, completely stunned. One of them recognized it as a legendary martial art that had been lost for over 10 years. They couldn't believe something so powerful was hidden inside that old screen. Mujin told them to teach this new art to all the warriors. He wanted everyone to learn it, starting immediately. The instructors looked at each other, understanding how important this was. They agreed. It was time to get to work. The instructors were fired up, making a ton of noise early in the morning. But Mujin was just exhausted. He was so tired, he could barely keep his eyes open. And just like that, the training began. The warriors took to the new sword art like they were born for it. For the first time, the Manhwa clan had a martial art that was truly their own, and it brought them all together. Even Mujin's younger siblings, Dojin and Soyeon, jumped into the training with everything they had. Everyone was pushing themselves to the absolute limit. The entire compound was filled with the sounds of sparring and intense practice. But while the rest of the clan was busy training, Mujin was getting ready for his own training. He had something different in mind. Mujin watched them train with a proud smile. Ever since they started martial arts, he'd never seen them happier, especially his younger siblings. And it made sense. They could feel themselves getting stronger every day. Turns out, they were both incredibly talented. He couldn't help but smile. They were good kids. But as he walked through the compound, he noticed something strange. The entire place was empty. He spotted one of the warriors sweeping nearby. The man seemed surprised. Mujin didn't know. He explained that today was the day of the sparring tournament, the Little Dragon Ascension Tournament. It was the biggest event in the region, held only once every 5 years. Without a word, Mujin unleashed a powerful sword technique, cutting through the air. The warrior could only watch in shock. Mujin thought about his siblings. He decided that if anything happened to them, he'd come for whoever was responsible. With a single swing, he unleashed a massive wave of energy that cut through the air, a clear warning to anyone watching. The tournament grounds were already packed with people. It was clearly the biggest event in town. One of the clan's instructors arrived with Mujin's younger siblings. His sister was practically bouncing with excitement. But just as they were taking it all in, someone stepped out and blocked their path. It was the chief steward of the Baek clan, Jang Siyun. He looked down on them and asked why they bothered showing up at all. The instructor's face fell. He knew exactly who this was. The steward just smiled, clearly enjoying the moment. He then mocked them, asking if the Hua clan would even have money for food after paying the tournament fees. That's when he noticed Mujin standing right there, listening to every word. The steward's insults hit a nerve. Mujin's younger siblings glared at him, furious. They weren't going to just stand there and take it. But a moment later, Mujin was gone from the street. He was now standing on top of a building, high above the crowds. He realized he had no idea where he was going. He muttered to himself that he should have asked Masok for directions before he just took off. He scanned the city below. That's when he saw it in the distance. Down in the crowded streets, two people in green robes were walking together. As they passed, people couldn't help but stare. One man was completely stunned, just watching them go by. The woman under the hat didn't seem to notice the attention. She just kept walking, a picture of grace and power. It was clear she was someone important. The woman in the hat didn't even look at him. She just told him to stop spacing out and get out of her way. But Mujin didn't move. He just kept staring as she walked past. Her companion glanced back, wondering what was wrong with him. That's when Mujin walked right up to her. He asked if she knew where the Little Dragon Ascension Tournament was. She seemed taken aback, asking him why he was staring at her like that. Before she could say anything else, someone stepped between them. It was an older man, dressed in the same green robes. He explained that they were also wandering around, looking for the tournament. But his friendly words didn't match his eyes. He was giving Mujin a look that could cut through steel. Mujin just stared back, completely unfazed by the threat. He turned his back on them. He said if they had legs, they could go find it themselves. The older man's threat was cut short by a sudden explosion down the street. Someone was clearing the way with force, yelling for everyone to get lost. The man just smiled. He seemed to know exactly who was causing all the trouble. The woman, however, looked completely confused. He recognized that kind of power. It belonged to the Baek clan. Mujin watched from a distance. He could feel it in the air. A huge storm was about to hit hit the city, and he was glad he'd come to see it for himself. And it looked like the storm had already found his family. Members of the Hua clan were being stopped in the street by a warrior in white. The commotion was already drawing a crowd. Everyone stopped to watch what was happening. The Hua clan warrior clenched his fist, his anger flaring up. He wasn't about to let his family be pushed around. The Hua clan warrior tried to calm things down. He promised that their delayed membership fees would be paid back soon, and that it wasn't something to worry about. The other members of the Hua clan stood by him, silent and tense. The man in white just laughed. He found it hilarious that young Master Mujin had supposedly recovered from his madness. He said he was really looking forward to seeing the clan's famous red flame art again. It was a clear challenge. The Hua warrior's hand tightened on the handle of his sword. He looked the man dead in the eyes and asked him what he was trying to do. He was done talking. He warned the man that his patience had a limit, but the warrior in white just sneered, mocking his pride. He began to draw his own blade, daring him to pull out his sword. Just as blades were about to be drawn, two figures appeared behind the Hua clan warrior. One was Hua Mujin. The growing crowd started to whisper, wondering if a real fight was about to break out. Mujin walked right between them and told them that was enough. He reminded them that tonight was for the kids' sparring match, not for adults to get involved. His eyes were cold and sharp. He wasn't asking. The man in white just smirked, surprised by the newcomer's boldness. He asked who he was, but the Hua clan warrior immediately bowed his head in respect. His loyalty made it clear who was in charge. Mujin looked over at his clansmen, casually mentioning that he should have been told about an event like this. The two youngest members of the Hua clan watched from behind him, their faces full of worry. Mujin gently patted his little sister's head. He thought to himself that these kids were truly unbelievable. With that, he turned his attention back to the men causing trouble. His expression was completely serious. He was done playing games. The man in white stared back in disbelief, demanding to know what Mujin had just said to him. An older man in green robes watched from the side. The older man stepped in, trying to calm things down. He suggested that since it was a special day, they should all put their swords away, but the woman in the wide hat cut him off, telling him to mind his own business. The old man just smiled, amused. The warrior in white sneered at Mujin. He mocked him, saying that poverty wasn't something a martial clan should be proud of. He then turned his insults to the children. He said Mujin should have at least bought them new clothes, and sarcastically asked if all their money went to the entry fee. The Hua clan warrior was furious. He muttered that he was going to take the man down. The older clan member behind him just sighed, clearly worried, but Mujin stepped forward. He asked what was so important about clothes, pointing out that dressing well doesn't turn a weak martial artist into a master. He decided it was pointless to talk to someone who wouldn't understand. He turned and walked away, taking the children with him. He didn't even look back. The older man in green walked up beside him. He told Mujin not to let it get to him, saying there are guys like that everywhere. The man had a strange, knowing look on his face. The Hua clan warrior watched them go, looking puzzled. The man in green just smiled to himself and disappeared into the crowd. As they walked, a man in red robes suddenly stopped them. He called out, asking if they were from the Flame Hua clan. The warrior confirmed that they were. The man smiled warmly and told them he would guide them to where they needed to go. He turned and led them through the crowded streets. Mujin watched him silently, not quite trusting this sudden help. Soon, they arrived at a massive estate. It was packed with people from all over. In the main courtyard, servants were busy setting up long tables. It looked like a huge feast was being prepared for everyone. The kids' eyes went wide. They stared at the mountain of food, completely amazed. Mujin just sat there with a slight smile, looking like he was enjoying the party. Just then, an announcement called for the Bet clan members to head over to the VIP seat. The older man who had been staring them down before just smirked, clearly enjoying their situation. But inside, Mujin was thinking about exactly when he should deal with him. He decided he'd start by plucking out one of his eyeballs. His thoughts were cut short when he felt someone walk up behind him. He turned to see a tall, bearded man in green robes standing right over their table. Mujin watched him, wondering why this guy was hovering around them like that. Sensing danger, he used a special technique to send a message only they could hear. He ordered everyone to put their food down and not to eat or drink until he did. The woman with the bearded man, stepped forward and offered her grandfather a drink. She poured the drink for him, and he thanked her by name. The man then turned to Mujin, telling him to have a drink as well, but Mujin just shook his head, saying he'd eaten recently and didn't need anything. The man's friendly act vanished. He stomped his foot hard on the ground, clearly angry. Just then, a man's voice boomed across the tournament grounds. He stood in the center of the arena, welcoming everyone to the Little Dragon Ascension Tournament, an event held only once every 5 years. He introduced himself as Seok Ildo, the head of the Seok clan, Psichang. He continued his speech, announcing that they had prepared some simple food for all the guests. At the mention of food, Mujin's eyes narrowed. He knew exactly what they were planning. Seok Ildo, the head of the clan, walked right over to their table. He wasn't looking at Mujin, though. His eyes were fixed on the old man. He bowed his head respectfully. It was a gesture you only give to someone you truly fear or admire. His eyes went wide. He couldn't believe who he was looking at. He recognized the man's face. It was Tang Sumun, the legendary poison emperor. Seok Ildo explained that he'd seen him once before, from a distance. The kids from the Hua clan just looked on, completely confused about what was happening. The name Tang Sumun started to echo through the crowd. Everyone Everyone was in shock. The Poison Emperor was really here. This wasn't just some random master. Tang Samun was one of the 4 martial emperors and the absolute strongest fighters in the entire Central Plains. And for some reason, a legend like that had shown up at a small sparring tournament for kids. It made no sense. The entire venue erupted into chaos. Everyone was staring, trying to get a look at the famous warrior. But Mujin didn't even flinch. He just calmly picked up his chopsticks and started eating. Seok Ildo started sweating. He couldn't believe he'd been so rude to the Poison Emperor without even knowing who he was. But Mujin just lifted his bowl, completely calm. While everyone else was freaking out, he just took a drink. That's when a small smile crossed his face. He remembered him, not as the Poison Emperor, but as a young kid from a long, long time ago. Back in his past life, 4 of the 5 great clans had refused to fight him. That was because he had already dealt with their leaders and their strongest fighters. And one of the young warriors who had been there that day was Tang Samun, the very same man who would one day become the Poison Emperor. For Mujin, it was just an old memory. But Tang Samun, the Poison Emperor, just waved his hand, telling the flustered man to have a seat. Seok Ildo was completely lost. He had no idea what the Emperor was talking about. That's when his eyes landed on Mujin. He suddenly became incredibly polite, apologizing for not recognizing the young master of the Flame Hua clan, and even offered to join their tables. Mujin just replied calmly, saying it was understandable that the man didn't recognize him. But the Poison Emperor wasn't listening. He was staring at Mujin, and the more he looked, the more familiar the young man seemed. He was reminded of a dependable friend and rival from long ago. The man he was thinking of was the Flame Emperor. Man, Seok Ildo, tried to break the heavy silence. He laughed nervously and commented on the weather, telling Mujin the match would start soon. He then asked if Mujin planned on participating, but he wasn't talking about this small event. He meant the Orthodox Murim tournament, the one held only once every 5 years. He told Mujin that the big tournament was coming up soon. He admitted that if Mujin decided to participate, it wouldn't be good for him. Mujin just gave a simple reply, saying it was a shame. He clearly wasn't interested in the conversation. Realizing his attempt at small talk had failed, Seok Ildo turned back to the Poison Emperor. He bowed low, shouting his respects. He apologized over and over, begging for forgiveness because he hadn't recognized the legendary warrior. But the Poison Emperor didn't even seem to hear him. He just calmly took a sip from his cup, making Seok Ildo wait. That's when Mujin put his bowl down with a soft click. He complained that it was getting noisy and asked when the match was supposed to start. Just then, a woman stepped forward. She was with the Poison Emperor. She thanked everyone for coming to see her grandfather, but said he didn't want any trouble. The tournament official quickly agreed, telling everyone to go back to their business. He announced that the match would start right away. Mujin watched as the chaos finally settled down. The official stepped into the arena to explain the rules. He said that only wooden weapons were allowed, and any moves meant to take a life were forbidden. If a blue pouch was thrown, the match would pause. A red one meant the fighter had to give up. With the rules out of the way, he announced the start of the Little Dragon Ascension Tournament. He called for the first fighter, Baek Sayon of the Baek clan. Then he called for his opponent, Hua Soyeon of the Flame Hua clan. She was just a little girl, busy eating a giant pickled radish. Mujin leaned toward her. He told her this was a chance to show off everything she'd been practicing and to see how much stronger she'd become. Baek Sayon looked down at the little girl, thinking she had terrible luck getting him as her first opponent. He smirked, deciding he would start by breaking both of her arms. But then he saw her expression. Hua Soyeon cracked her knuckles. She had planned on taking it easy, but now she realized that wasn't going to happen. Her eyes glowed with a strange energy. She told him that he would be the first offering for her own victory. Baek Sayon couldn't believe what he just heard. He was furious that a little girl would dare speak to him like that, but she just clenched her fists and told him to shut up. She was done with all the talking. Baek Sayon gritted his teeth. He warned her that she brought this on herself and that this wouldn't end with just broken arms. As the match was about to begin, Mujin watched from his seat, completely silent. He turned to Elder Joe and asked why the Baek clan was always picking fights with them. The elder explained that it wasn't a big problem when the Flame Emperor was alive, but after the new clan head took over, some of their members left and joined the Baek clan. Chief Steward Jang was one of them. As the Hua clan got weaker, the Baek clan started acting more and more aggressive. Mujin's eyes narrowed. He couldn't believe they were traitors. He asked why they would do something like that. Turns out, they had a big fight with the old clan head, and when the Baek clan took in all those new fighters, they got a lot stronger. The Baek clan used the anger those traitors had against their old clan to make things even worse. Mujin's hand tightened on his wooden sword. He had heard enough. The match began, and the fighter from the Baek clan immediately launched himself into the air, coming down hard on Hua Soyeon, but she stood her ground, blocking his powerful punch with her own. Without wasting a second, Hua Soyeon countered with a kick straight to his face. The blow landed hard, sending him stumbling back. He was completely shocked. She didn't even give him a chance to recover. She followed up with a brutal chop right to his neck, and as he fell to the ground, she finished it with one last strike. He lay on the ground, completely defeated, blood dripping from his mouth. She looked down at the boy on the ground and pointed, mocking him for his brutal nose. Watching from the side, the Poison Emperor noticed her kick techniques. He turned to Mujin and asked if he was the one who taught her. Mujin shook his head, explaining that he hadn't been in his right mind to teach her. He said her basics were all taught by Elder Joe. Lady Tang added that it wasn't just the kicks. She was impressed by the girl's natural vision and athletic ability, saying they were amazing for her age. But the Poison Emperor saw a problem. Her opponent was now holding a wooden sword, and he wondered how long long she could last against a weapon. The boy's face twisted with anger. He screamed that he was going to get rid of her for real. He charged forward, swinging the sword with everything he had. But Hwa So-yeon met the attack head-on, blocking the wooden sword with just her arm. The force of the blow was huge, but she held her ground. But she didn't just stand there and block. Hwa So-yeon started moving, dodging every wild swing he threw at her. Watching from the side, Lady Tang was impressed. She couldn't believe the girl had dodged every single one of his attacks. Her opponent was getting furious. He couldn't understand how she was so fast. He screamed in frustration, calling her a slippery loach. But Hwa So-yeon just kept her cool, watching his every move. He swung again, but she was just too quick for him. She kept dodging, but he was slowly forcing her backwards. That's when she ran out of room. Her back was against the wall. The men from the Hwa clan panicked. They screamed for her to get out of there, but she had nowhere left to go. A man from the Baek clan screamed from the sidelines. He urged his fighter to finish her off and show no mercy. Thinking he had her cornered, her opponent lunged forward with a furious roar, but she wasn't cornered at all. At the last second, she used the wall to launch herself right over his head. Elder Joe and Lady Tang watched in disbelief. Even Mujin, who had been quiet the whole time, had a small, impressed smile on his face. She landed perfectly behind him, leaving him completely open. The young fighter spun around, annoyed. He mocked her for jumping around like a squirrel after dodging like a loach. But Hwa So-yeon just smirked. She told him he fell right into her trap. His eyes widened. He had no idea what she was talking about. She explained that with her back against the wall, she could attack with full force without getting thrown backwards. With a confident grin, she challenged him to try and block her kicks with his slow sword. That's when the Baek clan fighter's face filled with panic. He knew he couldn't react in time. She unleashed a storm of kicks, one after another, giving him no chance to even breathe. The Hwa clan members stared, completely stunned. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. On the other side, the Baek clan elder was furious. He watched as his fighter was completely overwhelmed. The young fighter was bruised and bleeding, but he refused to give up. But Hwa So-yeon didn't give him a chance. She landed one final, powerful kick right on his wooden sword. The impact sent him flying backwards, knocking the sword right out of his hands. The Baek clan elder screamed in disbelief. But just as the match was over, someone threw a small pouch into the ring. It landed right in front of the defeated fighter. Hwa So-yeon paused, looking down at it with a confused expression. Hwa So-yeon stared down at the pouch, her expression turning serious. The defeated fighter looked up, a twisted grin on his face. He pointed a shaky finger at her, promising that this wasn't over. Hwa So-yeon just smiled. It wasn't a friendly one. The Baek clan fighter desperately argued that the match was over. He told her she had to stop, but she just ignored him and started walking forward. Her eyes glowed with a red light. She told him he could do whatever he wanted later, but right now, he had to deal with her. The fighter's face went pale. He was terrified. That's when Hwa So-yeon exploded with energy, leaping into the air to finish him off. An official from the Baek clan stared in disbelief, completely stunned by what he was seeing. Her kick landed hard. The fighter collapsed to the ground, groaning in pain. Hwa Mujin burst out laughing. He was loving every second of this. The Baek clan official finally snapped. He screamed at the referee, demanding to know why he didn't stop the match when the pouch was thrown. The referee's voice cut through the noise. He announced that Hwa So-yeon was disqualified. Mujin just laughed again. He told the others that this was a good way to end it, and that his sister had done well. The official fumed as Hwa So-yeon just turned and walked away without a word. But she wasn't done. She glanced back over her shoulder and stuck her tongue out at him, just to rub it in. The Baek clan official was absolutely furious. The woman just laughed, clearly enjoying how angry he was. Back at the Hwa clan's table, So-yeon was greeted by her family. One of them was still upset, complaining that the match should have been stopped earlier. Hwa So-yeon just dug into her food, not bothered at all. Mujin told her it didn't matter, explaining that beating the guy up was way more fun than actually winning. He completely agreed with what she did. He burst out laughing, so proud of his little sister. He was so happy he jumped right up on the table and started dancing. The rest of the clan just watched him, not sure what to do. An elder from his clan was not amused. He yelled at Mujin, telling him he was being tacky and needed to have some dignity. But Mujin just yelled back that he was too happy to care. He plopped back down and started drinking with the others. Mujin offered to treat everyone, then laughed and added that he wasn't the one paying. One of the men just sighed, completely done with him. As the celebration continued, the mood at the table shifted. The topic turned to So-yeon's fight and the special move she didn't use. So-yeon explained that she was already winning easily without it. She figured if she used it for no reason, her opponents might figure out a way to counter it later. The elder burst out laughing, impressed by how clever she was. The serious talk quickly turned back to fun as the kids started bickering over who got what food, and so their drinking party showed no signs of stopping. In the meantime, several more matches passed as the tournament continued, but Seok Ildo, the head of the Seok clan, Bodao, who was hosting the tournament, was growing more and more irritated. The announcer stepped into the center of the arena, calling for the next match to begin. Back at the table, a young boy named Dojin announced he was heading off. Hwa Mujin cheered him on, telling him to show everyone what he's got. Hwa Dojin walked towards the arena, his face serious and determined. Watching from the sidelines, One of the elders was shocked. He couldn't believe the Hua clan was using swordsmanship instead of their usual bare-handed fighting. The announcer gave the signal. The sparring match was officially underway. Seok Ildo watched with a stern look. He was counting on his fighter to get the Poison Emperor's attention. His opponent was Seok Chuyang from the Seok clan. He charged forward aggressively, taking the first swing, but Hua Dojin met the attack with a powerful swing of his own, his blade glowing with a strange blue light. Seok Chuyang's sword slammed into the ground, missing its target completely. In a flash, Hua Dojin had moved. He was already standing behind his opponent, who was completely defenseless. Seok Ildo's eyes went wide. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. The other spectators were just as lost. They whispered to each other, trying to figure out what had just happened. But the Hua clan understood perfectly. They exploded with cheers, so happy they felt they could die with no regrets. An elder from another clan trembled, stunned by the impossible move. Watching from the side, Hua Mujin just smiled. Everything was going exactly as he'd planned. He stood there silently, taking in the chaos he had created. Hua Mujin revealed the name of the technique that had just shocked everyone. The mind-severing sword art. The crowd went absolutely wild, shouting in disbelief. To get everyone's attention, Hua Mujin slammed his foot down hard on the table. He then made an unbelievable offer. Anyone who joined the Hua clan would get to learn the mind-severing sword art. His little brother and sister cheered him on. He explained that what they saw from Dojin's match was just the first half of the technique. That was all it took. The crowd erupted, with people shouting that they wanted to learn it right away. It turned into chaos instantly, and a man with a book started shouting for everyone to form a line. One of the clan elders started laughing. He couldn't believe Mujin was recruiting people in the middle of an event, calling him completely crazy. But not everyone was happy about this chaos. In fact, some people were getting really angry. Seok Ildo, the head of the Seok clan, was furious. He couldn't believe Hua Mujin would act so arrogantly, but he knew he couldn't do anything about it while the Poison Emperor was watching. One of his men came up from behind. He asked the clan head if he was really going to let the Hua clan do as they pleased. Seok Ildo just listened, his face tight with anger. But then, that anger turned into a wicked smile. He had an idea. He decided to mess with the tournament bracket and put his own warrior, Seok Yuso, in to take care of them. Seok Ildo's plan was simple. Rig the tournament. He was going to swap the bracket and put his own fighter, Seok Yeoso, into the mix. Turns out, this kind of scheming wasn't new. For a long time, the Seok clan and the Baek clan had been secretly working together to grab power. Their main tool was the Little Dragon Ascension Tournament, held once every 5 years. They would manipulate the matches to make sure their own apprentices won. Winning brought their clans fame, and in their world, fame was power. That's how they controlled everything and grew their influence. And now, back in the present, the final match in the top 32 was about to begin. The fighter stepping into the ring was Seok Yoso, the young master of the Diankong sect. An elder leaned over to Hua Mujin, pointing out that whoever won this fight would be facing his little brother in the next round. Mujin just smiled, unfazed. But another elder was completely stunned. He couldn't believe his eyes, stammering and asking why that specific guy was even here. The little sister watched the two fighters in the ring and asked if Seok Yeoso was strong. The elder sitting nearby explained that he wasn't just strong. He was the champion of the last tournament. He was surprised to see him, thinking he was still training with the Diankong sect. In the ring, his opponent, Ban Yowol, looked terrified. He knew exactly who he was up against. He stammered, completely shocked, asking why someone like him was even here. Seok Yeoso just smiled back, not saying a word. His opponent didn't buy it. He shouted that Seok Yeoso had to be lying about his age, claiming there's no way he wasn't at least 50. Seok Yeoso didn't bother to argue. He just charged forward, his eyes glowing red with power. The little sister watched, her eyes wide with worry, and just like that, it was over. His opponent was on the ground, completely defeated. The announcer declared Seok Yeoso the winner. Seok Yeoso just stood there with a smug look on his face, like it was nothing. The head of the Seok clan was absolutely furious, but Hua Mujin just calmly took a sip of his drink, completely unfazed. He smiled to himself. Everything was going exactly as he wanted. Meanwhile, Hua Dojin was getting ready. He was focused, preparing for the fight to come. As the day came to an end, the stage was set for the main event. The announcer's voice echoed through the arena, getting everyone hyped. He announced the next fight, Hua Dojin, the young master of the Flame Hua clan, versus Seok Yeoso. This was the match everyone was waiting for. Watching from the stands, one of the spectators commented that this was basically the final match of the tournament, happening way too early. The head of the Seok clan let out a smug laugh. His plan was already in motion. The Poison Emperor watched everything from his seat, not saying a word. The Hua clan cheered wildly, shouting for Hua Dojin to win. But Mujin watched with a serious look, knowing what was really at stake. On the stage, Hua Dojin faced his opponent, Seok Yeoso. The tension between them was heavy. Seok Yeoso started talking trash, asking if Dojin was there for revenge. He let out a little laugh, clearly trying to get under his skin. Then, a strange red energy started glowing around him. His eyes turned red, and he had this crazy look on his face. Without any warning, he swung his sword, unleashing a wave of that red energy. The fight had begun. He announced the name of his technique, the 12 Radiant Sword Strikes. Suddenly, a dozen slashes came at Hua Dojin all at once. He was completely caught off guard by the speed. He could barely block the attacks. The force of each strike was immense. Seok Yeoso mocked him, calling him a worm. He warned him that if he only blocked, his skull would be smashed in. The attack was relentless. Hua Dojin was being driven back, completely on the defensive. Watching from the side, Hua Mujin recognized the technique. It was the Diantang sect's signature fast sword style. The elder next to him agreed that this was going to be a tough fight, but Mujin didn't look worried at all. He just watched calmly. He kept his eyes on the stage, watching the battle play out. Watching from the sidelines, Seok Ildo had a wicked grin on his face. He urged his fighter on, telling him to show them the massive gap in their skills. On the stage, the difference in power was obvious. Seok Yeoso's attacks were relentless, and Hua Dojin was completely overwhelmed. Yeoso laughed, mocking him for struggling so much. Dojin could only grit his teeth and endure the punishment. The attacks just kept coming, one after another, with no break. But Hua Dojin wasn't done yet. He tightened his grip. Instead of just blocking, he started to push back, looking for an opening. Dojin finally made his move, but Seok Yeoso just laughed, saying he'd been waiting for this exact moment. It was a trap. Yeoso slammed his fist right into Dojin's shoulder. Seok Yeoso unleashed a powerful technique, and the radiant sword strikes. The strikes were too fast to block. Dojin was taking the full force of the attack. He grunted in pain, trying to hang on through the assault. The final hit sent him flying across the stage, slamming him into the ground. Seok Yeoso stood over him, ready to end the match. He casually remarked that it was ending a bit early, but just as he brought his sword down, something small and dark hit the blade. It was just a small stone. Seok Yeoso was completely confused, wondering where it came from. Then, from across the arena, the person who threw it came into view. It was Hua Mujin. Hua Mujin stood there, his eyes practically glowing. He wasn't going to let this go. Seok Yeoso just smirked. He seemed to find the whole thing funny. He looked down at Dojin, who was still struggling on the ground. He was clearly enjoying this. Ignoring everyone else, Hua Mujin walked straight onto the stage. He went right to Dojin to check on his hand. The entire arena watched as he crossed the floor to get to his fallen fighter. The members of the Hua clan looked on, terrified. His little sister gasped, her eyes wide with worry. Dojin gritted his teeth, trying to fight through the pain. Mujin looked at Dojin's trembling hands. From nearby, Seok Yeoso's voice cut in, tauntingly asking what he planned to do now. Without a hint of fear, Hua Mujin just looked back at him and agreed. On the stage, Dojin pushed himself up, his grip tightening on his wooden sword. He stood tall, ready to face his opponent once more. Watching from the side, one of the elders remarked on the boy's impressive spirit. The man next to him just said it was the least a martial artist's child should be able to do. Hua Mujin watched everything unfold, his gaze sharp. Seok Yeoso laughed, admitting he was seeing the kid in a new light. He said he expected him to just cry and quit, and was surprised he made it back to his feet, but his smile turned cold. He warned Dojin that since he was back, he'd have to bear the consequences. That was it. Hua Mujin snapped, furiously demanding to know what he just said. Seok Yeoso laughed cruelly and lunged forward, his fists glowing with a strange energy. He shouted that he was about to create a new pair of crippled brothers. He didn't even wait for an answer. Seok Yeoso just charged forward, his fists glowing. He had a twisted smile on his face, like he was enjoying every second of this. But just as the attack was about to land, everything seemed to slow down. A memory came rushing back, a time when Dojin was just a kid, training hard. In the memory, his older brother, Hua Mujin, stood before him. He looked down at Dojin and asked him a simple question. Did he want to win? With tears in his eyes, Dojin said he had to win. It was the only way to restore their clan's honor. Mujin told him not to worry about that. He promised that he, the big brother, would make their clan the greatest again. All Dojin had to do was focus on the match. Then he leaned in, a sharp look in his eyes. He told his little brother he would teach him the surest way to win. He explained that the instant an opponent uses a sword technique, a tiny opening appears right in the center. That was the key. Mujin's voice echoed in his memory, telling him that when that single moment came, he absolutely could not hesitate. He had to charge straight in and give it everything he had. The memory faded, and in the real world, Dojin moved. Ignoring the incoming attack, he aimed right for the center, just like his brother told him. Seok Yeoso's eyes went wide. He never saw it coming. Dojin's sword slammed right into his chest. The force of the blow sent him flying. Everyone watching was stunned. Even Dojin couldn't believe it. He actually did it. Seok Yeoso grunted as he hit the ground hard. The impact was way stronger than he expected. Watching from the side, the Hua clan members erupted in cheers. They couldn't believe he'd actually landed the blow. But the fight wasn't over. Seok Yeoso pushed himself back up, looking absolutely furious. He glared at Dojin, calling him a filthy insect, and questioning how he dared to even touch him. Dojin's confidence wavered. He knew that attack should have been enough, but it wasn't. Seok Yeoso started to threaten that Dojin wouldn't leave alive, but he was cut off when something smacked him right in the face. A red fruit fell to the ground. A moment later, someone stepped on it, crushing it completely. Seok Yeoso was livid. He spun around, demanding to know who had the nerve to throw something at him. Hua Mujin put his arm out, stopping his brother from going any further. Dojin just looked up, completely confused. He didn't understand what his brother was planning. Mujin just smiled and told him it was time to go home. An official from the tournament tried to stop him, but Mujin didn't even bother to look at him. He glanced back, making it clear he thought this whole event was a joke. The rest of the Hua clan gathered around the kids, unsure of what to do next. As Mujin walked away, a man called out, inviting himself over for a drink. The woman next to him was shocked, asking her grandfather if he was serious. Hua Mujin didn't seem to care one way or the other. He just told the old man to do as he pleased. As the Hua clan left, the crowd noticed the old man and his granddaughter were following them. It seemed the Poison Emperor was leaving too. One of the spectators clicked his tongue in annoyance. He was clearly upset that the show was over. He watched the old man and his granddaughter walk away into the distance. From another side of the arena, a different man watched everything unfold with a smirk. Meanwhile, on the busy streets outside the arena, people were going about their day. But then, one man stopped in his tracks, his eyes wide. He saw someone walking through the crowd who definitely didn't belong. The figure walked with a silent, steady pace. They stopped in front of a man who immediately bowed his head. These were members of the Crimson Sword sect, and they did not look happy. This was Hong Johong, also known as the Hidden Dragon of Sichang. He had a look on his face that just screamed trouble. The man with him, known as Death Black Crow, agreed. He told Hong Johong he was trusting him to take out a very dangerous target. Hong Johong didn't seem worried at all. He said they even had the Crimson Sword sect backing them up. He looked completely sure of himself, like this was all just a game to him. And there he was, Ju Sugang of the Crimson Sword sect. He explained that the moment his group got involved, the outcome was already decided. The group laughed as they walked down the street, clearly not trying to hide their presence. A couple of guys nearby watched them pass, confused by all the noise. One of the men decided to follow them, trying to see what was going on. He kept his distance, tailing the group as they made their way through the city. The group being followed finally arrived at their destination, the Hua clan's residence. Hong Johong stared at the entrance, unimpressed. He scoffed at the sight of the gate. Then with a single kick, he smashed it to pieces. The loud crash caught the attention of a young clan member inside. He rushed out to see the intruders standing among the broken wood. He furiously demanded to know what they were doing. Hong Johong just smirked, his eyes glowing with a strange energy. He told the man the gate looked so rotten, he figured the place was empty. He then asked if a mere servant was really daring to raise his voice at him. The young man was completely taken aback, stammering in disbelief. Before he could even respond, Hong Johong's hand shot out and grabbed him. Hong Johong wasn't alone. His whole crew walked in right behind him, strolling into the courtyard like they owned the place. They were clearly looking for trouble. A couple of the Hua clan members saw the intruders and couldn't believe their eyes. The noise reached Hua Mujin. He walked out to see what was going on, but things had already gotten violent. One of the intruders was stomping a clan member into the ground. It wasn't even a fight. The intruders took down anyone who got in their way. In just a few moments, they had taken complete control of the courtyard. One of the younger members saw Hua Mujin and ran towards him, crying out in fear. But an intruder moved to cut him off. Hua Mujin recognized the man instantly and clenched his fist. His eyes glowed. He reminded the man that he'd spared him once before, on the condition that he'd bring the money. Didn't get another word out. Hua Mujin moved in an instant, sending the man flying backwards with a single, brutal strike. Before the man could even recover, Hua Mujin's foot came down, aiming right for his head, but he wasn't the main target. Hua Mujin stood over Ju Sugang of the Crimson Sword sect, who was already on his knees. The man looked up, his face a mix of fury and complete disbelief. He couldn't understand how this was happening. From the sidelines, another intruder watched the whole thing go down. Hua Mujin just stood there, a little confused by the man's reaction. Suddenly, one of the intruder's eyes shot open. He recognized someone else who was there, an old man he never expected to see. A new figure appeared, his presence so strong it felt like the air turned cold. It was the Poison Emperor. He questioned why the Crimson Sword sect dared to raid a clan in his territory. He stared them down, his voice heavy. He told them that what they were doing wasn't just a raid, it was a declaration of war. A terrifying green energy exploded from the Poison Emperor, washing over everyone in the courtyard. The intruders froze, their faces filled with pure shock. Even the Hua clan members struggled to stand. The pressure was just too intense. The old clan member gritted his teeth. The killing intent was so strong, it felt like the very ground was shaking. Ju Sugang couldn't believe it. He frantically tried to figure out why the Poison Emperor would be here, of all places, defending the Hua clan. This was the Poison Emperor, one of the most powerful and feared men in the entire Miram. The realization hit Ju Sugang like a ton of bricks. If they offended this man, their entire sect could be wiped out. Without a second of hesitation, he slammed his head to the ground in a desperate bow. But the Hua clan's eldest wasn't satisfied with just a bow. He grabbed Ju Sugang and slammed his face into the dirt. His men could only watch, completely frozen in terror. The Poison Emperor's eyes glowed with rage. He told them that since they wanted to test him so badly, he would not only finish them, but also deal with their families before the next night. Ju Sugang screamed his name, his mind completely shattering with fear. That's when Hua Mujin stepped forward and stomped his foot. A massive shockwave of energy erupted from him, blasting across the entire courtyard. Everyone, including his own clan members, stared in total disbelief. Nobody knew he had this kind of power. Time later, things had calmed down. The entire Hua clan was busy, working together to rebuild. From a rooftop, Hua Mujin and and the old man watched them. The old man commented on how nice it was to see everyone so full of life. He said watching them work so hard made the food and tea taste even better. He took a sip of his tea. Then, completely out of nowhere, he apologized in advance for what he was about to do. The old man asked him about the energy he had used earlier, calling it movement arts. Hua Mujin didn't answer. Instead, he just reached for his bowl and asked for the old man's understanding, basically telling him he couldn't talk about it. The old man didn't need words. He launched himself forward, his hands glowing with a dangerous green energy. Hua Mujin reacted instantly, throwing up a block just in time to stop the strike. Hua Mujin's eyes widened. He realized the old man was dead serious. The old man came at him with a green, glowing blade, and their weapons clashed in a blur of motion. Watching from the side, the old man's granddaughter screamed his name, terrified. The two of them were moving so fast, they were practically flying above the courtyard. The clan members below could only stare, completely stunned. They couldn't understand what was happening. Why would their young master and the old man be trying to take each other out? But the old man wasn't playing around. He was putting real power into every single one of his attacks. He unleashed one of his signature moves, the poisonous explosive punch. Hua Mujin met the attack head-on, countering with the third form of the peerless 9 swords. With a furious yell, Hua Mujin put everything he had into his next move. He unleashed a technique called Qi Destruction. A massive wave of pure energy shot out from his sword. The attack was so huge, it flooded the entire courtyard in an instant. The old man stood his ground, bracing himself for the impact, and then the two energies slammed into each other. But in the middle of the explosion, Hua Mujin noticed something strange. It looked like some kind of powder. The old man's face was completely serious. His eyes locked on his opponent. That's when it clicked. A small grin spread across Hua Mujin's face. He finally understood what was going on. Hua Mujin was stunned. He couldn't believe it. He asked the old man how he could possibly know that sword technique. The old man explained that their fight was just a test to see his true skill. He invited Hua Mujin to come and sit down. Hua Mujin was completely caught off guard by the sudden change. A small smile formed on Hua Mujin's face. He couldn't help but think how strange this old man was. The old man took a seat, waiting for him. Hua Mujin poured a drink for him. The old man thanked him quietly.